6:30. I'd like to call the Rock County Board of Supervisors meeting to order on this 30th day of September, 2024, and ask Supervisor Peer to lead us in the invocation and Pledge of Allegiance.
Once there was a king who collected live crocodiles. He kept them in the pool at the back of his palace. He also had a beautiful daughter. One day he hosted a big party and invited the prominent families of his kingdom along with their bachelor sons. During the party he announced, "My friends and I am looking for the most courageous man for my daughter. I will give my daughter in marriage or award $1 million to the man who can swim across this pool full of crocodiles unharmed." Almost immediately, even before he finished speaking, there was a big splash in the pool. Everybody turned around and saw one guy swimming very fast. In just a matter of seconds, he crossed the pool unharmed. The king was impressed. "Oh my, you are indeed a brave young man. I did not think this could be done. You have proven me wrong. Now which do you want, my daughter or the $1 million? The young man looked at the king and said, "Listen, I'm not interested in your daughter and I don't need your money, but right now I want to know who pushed me in the pool." Dear Heavenly Father, guide us here tonight. Help us to look for your Holy Spirit to give us the things that we need to know to govern this county and to pass this budget, to help those in need and not just come with intentions that we think we know where it should go. Help us to be good listeners. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Supervisor Peer. Lisa, please call the roll.
Bob Zine. Belke. Here. Bostwick.
Here.
Bryan. Cullen. Here. Fugelseth. Here. Gorman. Here. Holman.
Here.
Knutson. Here. Marshall. Here. Mawhinney. Peer.
Present.
Pennycook. Here. Rashkin. Here. Ringhand. Here. Ryan. Here. Schneider. Here. Schulz. Here. Schwartz. Here. Stevens. Here. Stone.
Here.
Sutter.
Here.
Sutherland.
Here.
Tillman. Here. Towns. Here. Whitledge.
Here.
Wilson.
Here.
Woodman.
Here.
Levy. 26 present, 3 absent.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Next item is consent agenda. The only item on the consent agenda is adoption of agenda.
Is there a motion to approve consent agenda? Moved by Supervisor Schneider, seconded by Supervisor Woodman. Are there any questions on the consent agenda? Any objections to items on the consent agenda? Seeing none, consent agenda passes. Next item, please.
Next item, public hearing. We do not have a public hearing. Item 6, citizen participation, communications, and announcements. I didn't see anyone signed up in the back. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak this evening?
No. Are there any supervisors with announcements this evening? Anything from staff? Next item, please.
Next item is item 9, introduction of new resolutions or ordinances by supervisors for referral to appropriate committee.
If there are any supervisors that wish to introduce a brand-new resolution, please bring it forward at this time. Any supervisors wishing to introduce a new resolution, please bring it forward at this time. Seeing none, next item, please.
Our next item is 11C, review of 2025 recommended budget with county supervisor.
Josh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So before we get started, just want to go over a few things tonight, sort of what to expect and how this will go. So first of all, on your desk, there are several things. There should be a document that looks like this called 2025 Recommended Capital Projects. So this is a document we produce every year that summarizes what is recommended by funding source and what has not been recommended that was requested. So you may reference that as we talk about capital projects, different sources of funding. Certainly, I'd imagine General Services Committee will be talking about that as well. There's also one that starts with new positions recommended. Similarly, this goes through and shows the positions that were recommended, what was not recommended, deletions, and then other personnel changes, reclassifications, and reallocations with their related costs. So those are two documents on your desks. A third document that should be there, I referenced the other night in the presentation. It looks like 2025 budget appeals guidance and a form on the back on one page. So hopefully that's on your desk as well. So this, again, this is not a required document that you use if you're going to do a budget appeal. It's just the chair and the vice chairs asked that we come up with something to maybe try to summarize a little bit the process, since it's a little bit different this year. And then this form that you can use if you want, if you're going to make a budget appeal, to note sort of where exactly the money's coming from, where it's going to be consistent with the board rules. So that is on there for you to look at as well. And if you need other copies, more copies of that, you can either get them from us. There may be some more here. I believe there are more here up on the table if you want to get some before you go, depending on how active you intend to be in appealing things in the budget. Or we are, if we haven't already, we are going to be placing that online with the rest of the budget information. So if you want to go and get a copy of it online, you can get it there. So what we plan to do tonight is go through committee by committee and then department by department within committee, where I will go through the administrator's comments and give you the highlights. I'm not going to read everything that's written in there. You can read that. But I'm just going to give you some of the bigger issues in each department and then pause and let you ask questions about that. There are several pieces that I'm not going to touch on. So first of all, if you have the yellow version of the spiral-bound administrator's comments and budget information, that contains several different things. Each department will start with a personnel summary. I'm not going to specifically address that because I'll talk about personnel in the admin comments. There's a financial summary included there, not going to specifically dwell on that. I'll talk about some of the highlights when we go through the comments. And there's several pie charts for most departments that just show about revenue expenditures and sources and uses that I also am not going to discuss. If you are following along online with the versions that are posted to the website, they're a little different. What's incorporated into the online version that is not in your spiral-bound version is something we call the department charter. The charter is the department's own wording and language that uses to describe what their mission and goals are, what services they provide. So that's online, as well as at the very back of each committee section, there'll be budget printouts from our financial system that show in much more level of detail what by account number and line and so forth about where the expenditures are. So if you really want to get more in the weeds, that exists in the online version, but that's a lot of paper if we print that out, so we've gone to just putting that online. What you also notice is that if you are in your spiral-bound version, and so for example, tonight we'll start with the airport. If you were to open up the airport section and go to the personnel summary, you'll see it starts on page 4. That is not a mistake. We have numbered them to be the same. So page 4 in the spiral-bound version is also page 4 in the online version because the online version includes more stuff. So in case somebody wants to reference, gosh, in the administrator's comments in the airport section on page 8, it will be page 8 in both the electronic and the printed versions. So that's why those numbers look a little off in case you're looking at that. All right, I think that's the housekeeping things. So also, you will note by the time we get to the Human Services Department, Haley has passed out a copy of the Administrator's Comments for Human Services. They were inadvertently left mostly out of the spiral-bound version that you're in, which was not intentional that the largest county department was left out, and no one would have noticed, and it would have been just fine, I'm sure, right? So you have that printed out in front of you. That is online if you're looking for it there. So we'll go through that way. There are also things that are not necessarily included when you go department by department that are big picture things related to the county budget, some of the things I touched on the other day. So if we get to the end and you still have questions about overall county budget stuff that we didn't go over when we talked about the departments, please feel free to ask those as well. So I'm going to dive right in then, and we'll just start with the airport.
Josh,
Yes?
would you prefer if there are questions for them to ask as we go along rather than wait? Okay.
Yes, I think as we go along will make more sense. So I'll just rely on the chair to call on anyone who has a question as we go along. Okay, thank you. So the airport, you can see here the way that the administrator's comments are set up. We have a section for revenue expenditures, personnel, and then a summary. So on the revenue side, you can see here where we're getting revenue at the airport. You can see an operational number there, which is an increase of 17.8%. And that was because the airport committee recently approved an increase in some rates for fuel flowage. You can see the leases there also going up for revenue standpoint, and then T hangars as well. There are two different fund balances at the airport. There's a capital fund balance and operational fund balance. Historically, because the airport is, from a financial statements perspective, kind of in its own fund, when there's savings in the operational budget from year to year, that stays in the airport's operational fund balance. We typically have not used that for operations over the years because then, we don't want to use fund balance for ongoing costs. So typically we transfer that over to fund one-time expenditures of the airport. So at the bottom of the revenue section, you can see both the capital and operational fund balances. We are recommending to use a good portion of that for capital projects in 2025, and you can see that at the end of 25, there'd be about $120,000 left in the operational fund balance. So going on to expenditures, on that point, you can see that we have $615,000 in capital projects recommended next year. Those are broken down in three ways. Federal aid projects, that is what I every year call just about the best deal in county government, where you get 90% paid for with federal funds, 5% with state funds, and we're only funding 5% of those costs. So of the, you can see of the $615,000, $93,500 is for these federal aid projects. Some of these should sound familiar to you. The first couple, Amy was up here talking to you about at a previous meeting recently, where we approved that sponsor-only memo. So our ongoing East Hangar project, as well as our airfield electrical upgrades, were included in that. We've also got a project on runway 1432, and finally, an additional $21,000 for our snow equipment, which has been a several-year project, and finally, the state's ready to proceed. We don't have any state-funded projects next year, and then we have several county-funded projects, as you can see listed there. The T-hanger rehabilitation, that comes out of our recent T-hanger future of the airport ad hoc committee, which is recommending an approach with our T-hangers going forward. We're also intending to pay off our telehandler lease, as well as get a new crew cab pickup truck. The skid loader for $100,000, and then some engineering rehab on our roads out at the airport. So those are the big projects. There's some other operational things you can read here. As far as personnel goes, there aren't personnel changes in the budget, but there are some personnel costs based on the implications here. So staff committee recently approved some changes that are noted here in the personnel section, which should lead to improved operations, but do cost a little bit more. And so those are incorporated here as well. So overall tax levy for the airport, $544,000, which is an increase of about 11.8% over the prior year. Are there any questions about the airport budget? And if you don't have questions right now, this is not, you're going to be your last opportunity. So it's okay if you don't ask them now. You'll have another chance, I'm sure, over the next 6 weeks or so. So if we're done with the airport, then what we'll do next is we'll just kind of keep flipping back in the document. We'll go to Public Works Committee next. So the Public Works Committee administrator's comments begin on page 17 of whatever document you're using. And we'll start with parks. So the parks revenue, just like the airport, there are several sources of revenue we have in parks. Boat landing fees, park use fees are going up about $10,000 as there is continued interest in using and renting out park facilities. We also have a house at Gibbs Lake, and then we get a little bit of money from Walworth County for trail maintenance. From an expenditure standpoint, the Parks Division had asked for several capital projects in 2025, the largest of which was $650,000 for construction of the Sportsman's Park Shelter, $30,000 for the Sweet Allen Park design, and I am not recommending either of those due to just the limited amount of sales tax that we have available in 2025. I am recommending sales tax for the $50,000 Poros plan. That plan has to be done every 5 years to maintain eligibility for grants, and so every 5 years we'll do that. And so I'm recommending the $50,000. There's also some additional funding that I'm recommending we include in here for the Peace Trail project along County D. There's some design work that would be needed done first. There's still some uncertainty about this going forward as to whether or when this will advance, but to keep our options open, I am recommending that we include some money in here to allow us to move forward if we're able to do that in next year. No personnel requests for the parks. I'm going to pause there before we get into the highway portion. Any questions about the parks?
Mike. Your mic.
I'm sorry.
The $650,000 for construction of a new shelter at Sportsman's Park. Is that starting a project, or is it already in the planning stages?
So we do have a design done for the Sportsman's Shelter, so that was funded in previous years. So now that the design's done, we're just waiting for funding to actually do construction. So the project, the design, the construction has not begun yet. It's just waiting for funding in a future year from the board.
Woodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It says no personnel request changes for parks personnel on 2025 budget, but didn't you ask that we reduce one staff for parks?
Yeah, good question. So what had happened with that one position, there was a parks assistant position, and back in the timeframe May, when we had our joint committee meeting with staff and finance, and we got some direction on what the committees wanted to see in the budget, I had put on hold filling several positions to make sure that by the time that we got into the budget, if we had to delete a vacant position, for example, it's always better to delete a vacant position than one that's filled. And so I had put a hold on filling several positions, including that one. However, because it is not recommended to be permanently deleted in the budget, and because the budget, as is presented to you, balanced, I went ahead and told Dewey and John that they go ahead and fill that position. And so that is not reflected in here because that's a position that will be filled. They're currently recruiting for that. All right, we'll move on to Public Works in the Highway Division. So a lot of the kind of the crux and the nexus of the budget kind of goes through the Highway Division in a lot of ways. And so I'll spend a little time kind of going over what has happened here in the strategy for Highway in 25. So as you can see on page 19 of the administrator's comments, the very top there in the budget highlights kind of outline what the strategy was in Public Works for 2025. So, you know, given that the interest of the board has been in reducing borrowing costs, that's what the first bullet talks about. You know, we haven't included any borrowing in 2025 for highway projects, which increases the need to use sales tax. The second bullet notes that we also have stress on sales tax because sales tax is being used to reduce the debt service levy, to reduce taxes. So we've got those dual pressures on projects, highway projects in Public Works. Due to some of the rain and tornado work that we've had, the decision was made to put off the County X that was in this year's budget until next year. And then similarly, we're going to bump County J, which was in our capital improvement plan for 2025, into 2026. So all those were done based on that feedback and direction of the board as a way of balancing the need to continue to maintain highways, as well as to utilize the staff resources we have available to keep staff occupied and productive in the summer on these kinds of projects and maintenance projects, as well as then balance that with the need, same number of sort of hours and work in the winter to be able to plow the snow. So that was sort of the strategy at a very high level as we went into the 2025 budget. There's several large revenue sources that we get largely from the State Department of Transportation. As you can see here on these, we get about $3.2 million to maintain state highways. General transportation aids in the budget before you are the same, just about the same level, a little bit less than the prior year at about $2.9 million. And that's because it's a six-year rolling average formula, which isn't necessarily responsive to the year-to-year changes at the county level. We're also going to have contracts with 14 to 20 towns again in 2025, as directed by the Public Works Committee. They directed that we continue to do that moving forward, so that was also a priority we incorporated into the budget here. The one change that you will see here is an increase in the winter maintenance rate. We split that back in 2022. Currently, the rates are $900 per mile in the rural areas and $1,600 in the subdivisions. In 2025, the recommendation is to increase that to $940 and $1,670 respectively. Basically, our analysis over time showed that we weren't quite keeping up with covering our costs for that, and so this will balance that out better than in the past. The routine maintenance charge is recommended to remain the same at $1,700 per center line mile. That really is a minimum in the contracts that we ask from the towns, again, to kind of maintain that base level. Historically, the towns have spent more than that, and that's so you see reflected in the budget here an increase in the revenue we expect to get from the towns for routine maintenance and construction services that we provide to the towns. From an expenditure standpoint, you can see that the county maintenance and construction account, so if you think about the work that the county does on its own highways, that's in the county maintenance and construction account. So you can see here there's really several revenue sources. GTA we already mentioned, town maintenance charges already mentioned, and that's about $3.7 million. I am recommending a combination of prior year and current year sales tax collections to fund blacktopping. Blacktopping equals county construction projects on county trunk highways. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then there is tax levy for $1.9 million of the remaining costs. Over the years, this account has been funded by a combination of obviously funding we get from the state and the towns, the tax levy, sometimes sales tax. If we borrow for highway projects, borrowing funds, debt is in here. And so that fluctuates from year to year. In the most recent couple of years, we had a lot of sales tax in here. But given the pressure on the sales tax, we've moved that out, and we move in some tax levy. As I note here, as I mentioned the other day, the tax levy that we have available here is largely because we have the savings at Rockhaven. And not that it goes directly from Rockhaven to Public Works, but it goes into the general fund, so to speak, and then comes back out over here. And so that really, I just wanted to make it clear how we're able to pay for tax levy in this account this year. It's because we have savings in other parts of the budget. So if you flip to the next page, we have a table that talks about the different parts of the county maintenance and construction account budget, totaling $7.7 million. And then the following kind of breaks that out a little bit. So you can see seal coating at $251 up in that table, and then the table below is seal coat projects at the same $251,000. So you can see we have a couple seal coat projects. That is also, as I mentioned, tax levy funded. Most of the interest is about the county construction projects from year to year. So as you can see here on page 22, that table in the middle, that outlines the county construction projects that we are proposing to do next year. The biggest ones be County B and County T. Each of those are 2 miles, and each of them are about $836,000. And then we've got some real estate and utilities on H for a future construction project that we have to typically do that a year ahead of time, if not more, to get that all ready to go. So you can see that that is 2.7 fewer miles than the prior year, but with the shifting around of County X and the federal aid project that we'll talk about, we're really keeping pace in 25 with the number of miles that we want to every year. You can see at the bottom of page 22, begin a discussion about town bridge aid. So in the presentation, you remember that I mentioned about the limited levy. So town bridge aid, because it is not levied on all property in the county, is outside of levy limits. So it's only charged to the towns. Essentially what this is that we share the cost with the towns on bridge reconstruction and maintenance. So what we're requesting going forward here, if you flip the page to 23, is 3 projects that are funded with federal dollars. Those are the 3 at the bottom. Those are just $500 apiece. And then there's 2 projects that are higher cost. In addition, we're also requesting $100,000 to be set aside in the Bridge Aid Fund because there's always something that happens during the year. We like to ask the towns to let us know in advance what they might be thinking, but either they aren't able to align their meetings with our meetings, or something just happens and something breaks, and we can move forward with something if we have a little flexibility there. So that's what you see, the total $291,500 that we're looking for from Bridge Aid. Last year we only had $50,000 that we taxed for Bridge Aid, so this is an increase of $241,500. The federal aid project I mentioned is at the top of page 24. That's the County Inn project. So the county cost of that's $516,000, but the overall project is just under $2 million. So again, a good deal for us that we're getting federal bill money. Bill is the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed a couple of years ago in Congress. So that's the County Inn project. There's also a design on a bridge also on County Inn. Going to move on to equipment. So every year we buy equipment. Historically, the way we have bought equipment in Public Works is that we've used cash, and we've used our cash to buy that, and then we have a depreciation cost that is in the budget that we eventually, essentially are paying ourselves back for the cash that we've used to purchase it up front. And we're required to depreciate this equipment, so that makes sense. However, despite the table that you'll see in here, which shows the line graph of the increasing depreciation costs over time, given increasing costs of equipment, we've not been able to keep up with replenishing our cash enough just from depreciation. And so we're not proposing to use cash this year to buy the equipment, but instead we're going to use a combination of sales tax and levy to do that. So if you look at the top page 25, you can see, as I've noted here, that the department has asked for $3.2 million for equipment purchases in 2025, and that is already less than what they've asked for in the past several years. And I'm going to be recommending even less than that, about $2.7 million. Again, that's just reflecting that there's competition for funding in 2025. And you can see the breakout there, partially sales tax, partially levy. And again, there's the 2 different sources, the levy sources that I mentioned earlier. I mentioned Rockhaven. The other one is the treasurer's budget, where there's some additional interest income, and I'll talk about that when we get to the treasurer's budget. But essentially, those increases in revenue or savings in the operational budget allows us to fund these things here in Public Works. You can see here that in the table below that $2.6 million, I've shaded the table that would allow us to purchase through, which is sort of priority 24, so almost as much as was in the request, but not quite. I did include some language in here to talk about kind of what the implications are of that. We are sort of in the last year of what was intended to be a 5-year project. We're going to ramp up purchases based on a study that was done in 2016 about sort of the analysis of when do we actually break even, and when is it better to buy new versus continue to put money into maintenance. And, older equipment, increased maintenance costs; newer equipment, increased purchase costs. There's a line somewhere where those 2 things cross, and so we're trying to get closer to the optimal purchase there. So you can see here, though, that just over the last 5 years or so, we've had about $4.3 million a year for equipment purchases, and 2025 recommending 2.6. So you can see there a decline. And the implication of that simply is just that over time, as you don't replace equipment, it gets older, and your maintenance costs will go up. So there is no objective right answer as to how much to spend on equipment maintenance or equipment to purchases from year to year. And so this is just factual information, just to let you know kind of what the change is in 2025 compared to the last several years. So again, the capital equipment list shows you the priorities for the equipment and the depreciation line graph as well about the increases in depreciation costs over time. Personnel, several personnel requests in 2025, including for accounting supervisor, account specialist, 2 account specialist positions, an administrative professional position, and a reallocation of highway tech sign maker position.
Josh, if I could, I think Supervisor Schwartz had a question.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a real quick question on the capital equipment. Obviously, we're only looking at 3 major units, the heavier. How many were we thinking we really need? Whether it be the quad axles or the single axle? Because I know I looked at, as I walked that fleet, it seemed like, clearly there's some aged fleet there.
Yeah.
That probably is going to eventually need to be replaced.
Yeah, dude, you want to come up and just talk about the fleet in general and kind of what the strategy is and how many pieces of equipment we have and need?
Good evening, again. Thanks for having me. That's a good question, Supervisor Schwartz. We have a significant fleet, somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 pieces of equipment. But specifically to kind of the big truck question that you were asking, more so on the quads, we're in the 20 to 25 quads range. I don't know exact number off the top of my head, but we're in that range. And basically, we've got a equivalent annual cost calculation that we do internally. And so we put a lot of data in and go through all of that. And kind of like Josh was talking, there was a study done in 2016 that kind of gives you that initial purchase price versus when does your maintenance start taking over and where's that optimum spot, okay? In that report, they focused in on single axle trucks. And what that was at year 9, okay? On our analysis and what we've had the committee adopt as kind of a equipment policy is we run the same calc, very similar calc, but then we also put a scoring metric to it based on, 10,000 miles, it gets a point. Every year of age, it gets a point, and we've got a scoring metric for it, okay? So when we do that, what we're at is basically kind of flipping 2 trucks a year. So when you're asking how many do we have, that's why, but we were looking at 2. We've looked, I think single axles, we had 2 in here still. Those are part of the fleet where we might have had 3 in there. I can't remember exactly. I think we had a couple tandems in the initial CIP, but when we reevaluated the tandem list, there's a couple that we're running a little stronger that we think we can get by. So we kind of took a good hard look at this again with our whole, superintendents, myself, Nick, we all sat in and really examined it very thoroughly to see where could we responsibly trim back to try and manage that through.
Okay, no, thank you, because that just makes sure I know it's hard to get vehicles, they're expensive, and they're not going to get any cheaper going forward, so just wanted to confirm. Thank you.
Supervisor Fugelsang.
Thank you, Chair. What brand of vehicle, the trucks, pickup, supervisor trucks?
Well, for pickups specifically, is that what you're asking, pickups?
Yeah, has it already been determined what type or what manufacturer they'll be purchased from?
No, we pull them off the state contracts,
Okay.
state bids.
And what's the difference between the supervisor trucks and the pickup 1-ton 4x4?
Usually the supervisor trucks have a crew cab because they tend to be hauling either crew or sometimes the town supervisors, things like that around to look at different things within the projects. The regular pickups are usually single cab or maybe an extended cab, but not the full crew cab.
Thank you.
Supervisor Holman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dwayne, I got a question. We have, and seeing how equipment comes and goes, and we go through the process of purchasing equipment, and when we do break loose with cash to get trucks, by the time the order goes through, by the time the truck is received to the company that is going to do our retrofit, that can take years to get that truck turned around before it even makes into the fleet. And you know as well as I do that when you start talking several years, 4 to 5 years possibly, out there, you've already got an old truck, a new truck in old fleet, basically. And then you start looking for parts. And parts are based on a newer truck, not the older trucks, and then we run into that part problem again. So we're kind of like chasing the old dog. How can we possibly, when we purchase a vehicle, how can we get our turnaround quicker to get those trucks into fleet and utilize that money that we have now spent? Because every time that truck sits longer and longer, it's getting older and older. And now we sit with an old truck with possibility of parts are harder to get.
Well, the short answer, there's not really an option. I mean, to use the vendors that we use, and we've explored, for those of you that are maybe a little newer on the board, we've explored, a lot of our trucks get built in Monroe Truck. We have had a number of trucks built out in Pennsylvania, a company out there. We've had some done at Truck Country up in Green Bay. We're really trying to explore different areas when we bid this to see anywhere we can go to get a truck flipped faster or built faster. So when we do that, we buy the chassis. The rolling chassis comes off a Sourcewell contract. So when that chassis comes in, now the vendors that are going to build the truck don't really want to allocate that position until the chassis is on the ground. Okay, so when we're waiting maybe 8 months, 12 months, 15 months to get a chassis in, so as soon as the budget's adopted, our fleet specialist jumps on this and she's getting these things out right away. So we're going in as early as November, but we may not get that chassis till next fall or maybe the spring after that. Okay, the chassis will land. Now we've got to send it somewhere to get the body built. So all the wings, all the plows, the box, any of the sanders, spreaders, any of that stuff has to get added onto it. That's going to take us at least another year, if not more. So when Supervisor Holman's talking about that, we're reasonably 2 years plus to get a truck from when you guys approve it in the budget. One thing we have been exploring, and we've been talking with, I think it's Dodge County. Dodge County do their own? Dodge County has 2 staff, and they have a facility where they build their own. They do it in-house. They procure all the pieces, they have people trained, and these guys actually at their county build them. Now, we could do it faster. I don't know if it'd be cheaper. I don't know, we haven't gotten into that whole depth because that's a significant investment. Because we don't have room in our current facility to do that. They have a whole area designated. Could we get them faster? I'm sure we could do it faster. Cheaper, I don't know. And then on top of it, you've got capital investments to make that happen and staffing.
Supervisor Holman?
Thank you, Dwayne. One more quick question on that. So when we do buy a vehicle, a truck to be put in the fleet, and once we get that order and that truck is now ours and the delivery has shown, are we putting that truck at that point in time under depreciation schedule, and the truck as it sits there at, say, Monroe or wherever, is it depreciating out of our schedule to be turned around because it's not even running?
No, because it's not classed.
Okay.
Not class that truck with the state, therefore we can't really hit that cycle until it's turnkey getting used.
Thank you.
So that's our start date on all of that, in-service date.
Supervisor Fugelsett.
Thank you, Chair. With the rising costs of vehicle insurance going up 30, 40%, is that factored into any of the budgets for vehicles?
Yeah, we have a separate account outside of Public Works where we do all of our insurance for all of our vehicles and buildings and whatnot. So that's separately budgeted, operated through Corporation Counsel's office by a risk manager.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Thanks, dude. Yeah, maybe. So just a few more things here again, and if I keep just, I'm trying to go quickly, so interrupt me if you have a question if I'm not looking up. And as I was talking about personnel, several personnel requests. that I'm not recommending. I just wanted to note in here in some of the language that I think those who've been engaged with the Public Works Committee and with staff out there know that this is one area where we've struggled to keep staff that, particularly following the wage study, we've had some turnover. And just wanted to note here that the department, HR, we've all been putting our heads together to try to figure out a way to address some of the issues there. And as I note here in this bullet point, I just wanted to acknowledge here the challenges of trying to address issues in one area that don't affect the entire county budget, and with the dollars that we have, and that is a challenge. So I just wanted to note that here in the comments as well. So overall, big picture summary, you can see that on page 30, where I have both the expenditures and the levy. So you can see the levy in parks is up by about 9.5%. In the highway division, the levy is up a crazy huge number of 3.2 million, or 276%, and that's because of what I talked about earlier, where we are putting levy back into things that we in the last year did not have levy in, like construction, county highway construction maintenance account, and equipment. And so that's why it's going up so much. And you've seen over the past couple of years, it's really fluctuated quite a bit based on the source for those things. Other things to note here, overall tax levy for the department is up by $3.3 million. And then I talked about bridge aid, and then we didn't talk about the motor pool, but motor pool expenditures, $366,900. Motor pool, so Department of Public Works runs the county's motor pool, so they will also purchase off-state contract vehicles that we use in other departments, Human Services, Health Department, for operations.
Supervisor Shorts.
Thanks, Chair. Going back to the personnel, and the bullet point referencing that some county staff, you guys are working on some things regarding wages. How quickly do we think something will come from this, or, because there's obviously been a lot of pressure, a lot of discussion, and a lot of people leaving. So I was just curious if we're close to something, or is it something that someone's going to have to try to amend in the budget to make something happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I would say, there's a couple of answers. We continue to try to monitor, how many vacancies we have, and, we've been able to hire some staff that are currently being trained to do. We can certainly talk about this more, some of the changes that we were able to get some staff, but with some training required, so they may not have their CDL or their Class A, and so we have to invest a little bit more in training, and it takes more time to do that. And again, if you have more questions about that, we can certainly speak to that. I would say specifically in response to your question, there's nothing imminent as a solution to this, and I think that what I tried to spell out in this comment is that the solution I think that we're hearing that would be responsive to staff's concerns it would be very hard to keep that just to Public Works, right? And so the cost of that would be it'd be very expensive to do that countywide, and therefore we just kind of feel stuck a little bit in trying to address the needs and the wishes of staff out there in a way that wouldn't have effects across the county.
Yeah, I concur. I think it's something that have to be looked at across if something was done for certain wage grid changes. But I do believe that we do need to start looking at something here, because it is causing a lot of havoc.
Supervisor Fugelseth.
Josh, I got a good question. I apologize for being late. Under the rail transit budget, there's $30,000. The last meeting we had, they said that they haven't received a payment for '24 yet. You know who's responsible for paying that?
Well, I can find out and make sure they get paid. Yes, but that next page there, just so we hadn't, if you flip it there, you can see $30,000 for rail transit is what we've done for many years now. Yeah, we'll certainly look into that.
We just looked at that here this week. We're going to be getting on that. Yep.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Yep.
Supervisor Fugelseth.
Thank you, Chair. You had talked about very expensive wage across the board. How expensive? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't done the math to see what the, so for example, the example I give in the document here is that if we were to take staff who were placed on the wage grid, you may recall that when we adopted the wage grid from a seniority standpoint, the staff committee directed a change that we place people, with 0 to 5 years of service at step 1, to 5 to 10 years at step 2, and so forth and so on, up to step 5 or 6 based on seniority. And so, what would be responsive to concerns of staff would be to place folks with more seniority. I have 20 years of seniority, I'm at step 5, they want to be up higher as compared to their newer colleagues. So we haven't costed that yet, and one of the reasons that we haven't costed it across the organization is because when we were doing that at the wage study at staff committee, it was not fundable, in the way that that we're talking about here in this bullet point. And so, I think it's not, it was not, has not been, is not currently even realistic to think about, and so we've just not spent time doing it, until we get an answer that might be something different than kind of what that is. So I can't even give you a number because we've not costed it countywide. But we certainly can. It's just that we have not. Just to give you some perspective on what it would cost, we just haven't done it.
How do you feel about a pilot in the personnel department for, what is this, highways?
I think it's probably less how I feel about it than how the rest of the county workforce would feel about it when they're not in the pilot program and getting the wages, that everybody else is. But honestly, the reason I put this in here is because it was an issue, and I thought it engendered some discussion and it's worth highlighting for you all. So if there is something that you all think that you want to do, I would welcome ideas to help address this issue in Public Works, because we have been talking about it a lot and thinking about it a lot. It does have impact. So if there are thoughts and ideas that you have, whether it's pilot program or something else, we welcome your input and ideas about it.
I'd be curious to see what the grid would look like for this department, just as a exercise in mathematics.
Yeah, we can work on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions related to Public Works?
Not next department. Moving on.
All right. So if we're done with Public Works, thanks, Dewey. I already mentioned rail transit, so I think we're okay there. So then next we will flip back again. So if you flip backwards, next is Public Safety and Justice Committee. So if you flip back to that section, the sheriff's administrator's comments are the first up, and they start on page 17 in that section. So really in the sheriff's budget, there are two different sections we talk about. One is law enforcement services, and one is correctional services. There are some other budgets there, for example, for the RECAP program and a few other grants, but those are the two large ones. So you can see here we start with law enforcement services, and you can see the different sources of revenue that we get. And so some are going up and some are going down a little bit. I'll talk about sales tax here in a little bit. Overall revenue in law enforcement services is decreasing by about $20,000. On expenditures, the vehicle maintenance account the total costs are going down a little bit. Those are costs that have fluctuated over time, not unlike Public Works. The newer vehicles you have, the less maintenance they require. We've had a policy of the sheriff has circulated some of those when they come out of service as squads throughout the organization for other purposes. And so really it's the department's decisions on how to use those vehicles that affects the maintenance account. Gas is also something that is usually a big cost in the budget. Not knowing what's going to happen next year, there's no recommendation to change that from what this year's amount is. You can see on page 18, there's several things noted there. I would jump down to the vehicles again. You can see here that the total cost for these squads is the $599,855. You may recall that earlier in the summer, you passed a resolution directing that amount be included in the budget for this purpose. And so we are using sales tax funds for that as directed by the board. And there's a few other things you can see below that, also recommended to be funded by sales tax, a couple radar units, a drone, GPS unit for accident reconstruction, and a diving suit. There's two other projects the sheriff had requested that are not recommended, and they're not recommended not because they're not worthwhile, but just again, these were sort of casualties of having to prioritize the use of sales tax in the budget. That was for additional technology for the Real-Time Operations Center. The Real-Time Operations Center was a specific space that was built into the new facility for the purposes that I've noted here in the bullet point. So there's 50,000 recommended for that, excuse me, and the funding not recommended, as I noted, just because of budget constraints. Likewise, the sheriff has requested $68,254 as part of a 7-year lease-to-own contract for a new Bearcat. We currently share a Bearcat with Janesville and Beloit. And again, the sheriff, I'm sure, would be happy to talk more about this and what the implications are of not having that in the budget. It's obviously, when something gets to be 10 years old, it starts to get some maintenance issues and reliability issues, and that's why the sheriff wanted to pursue that, but that is not recommended as well. No personnel changes on the LES side. I guess I'll pause there before I go into correctional services. Any specific questions right away on the law enforcement services side of the sheriff's budget? Keep going then, into correctional services. Also here, several revenue sources. Civil process fees are the big one increasing next year due to a new coordinated effort with child support, where the sheriff's office is going to be the process server for the child support office now. And so the benefit of that is that the child support office will pay the sheriff to do this for them, and we'll be able to recoup 2/3 of those costs in the child support budget. So that's a nice collaboration between those two departments. You can also see that prisoner fees in several categories are going up, state, federal, municipal, for various reasons, including an ongoing contract with Dane County to house some of their overflow inmates. And you can see here mention of, as I mentioned before, the recap and the TAD grant for the drug court. No changes from prior years for that. There's a change here you may note in the commissary commissions line item, and just sort of an accounting change or how we're doing that, which changes the revenue coming in, which is offset entirely on the expenditure side, so no effect on the levy for those changes. On the expenditure side, for correctional services, the first two bullets on page 20 really are two of the bigger changes year over year in the budget. You may recall that earlier in the year, the board approved new contracts for for Vital Core Health Strategies, which is the healthcare vendor for inmates in the jail. So that's an increase of $820,000, or 67% over the prior year due to that new contract. Likewise, we bid out for food service. Aramark received that contract, which was awarded by the county board earlier this year. That's a $200,000 increase over the prior year. So those two contracts alone account for $1 million of increased costs in the '25 budget. There's various other things you can see here I won't go over. I'll jump down to personnel. There are a couple personnel requests coming out of the correctional services side. One is a reallocation of the recap site coordinator, which I have not recommended, and one is to create a new treatment coordinator position. While this looks like a big new cost of $103,000, actually this just replaces a contracted cost that we've had for many years that was provided by CISA 2. And so because they're ending that contract, we have to have a position for the recap program, so we're just going to hire a county employee to do that. And so that's actually a little bit of a cost savings for us year over year. So overall, just a summary, you can see that on the law enforcement services side, the levy is going up by about 5.6%. On the correctional side, 7.8%. Overall, the sheriff's office, the tax levy is an increase of $1.8 million, about 6.7% over the prior year. Any questions?
Supervisor Schwartz?
Thanks, Chair. I know when we were going through the budget the pre-budget, there was talk about additional potential for federal, more revenue for federal inmates, and I was just curious if that's progressed at all.
Yeah, that's not included in this version of the budget yet. I think that's still outstanding. If the sheriff has any new information, I certainly welcome to come up and share that. But last, our discussion was that that was still sort of an outstanding pending issue, no resolution yet, and so those funds aren't included in this, in the recommended budget.
Supervisor Belkey.
Thank you, Chair. Do you know if they'll contract with any other counties when housing inmates? I know they do it with Dane. Will they have any other counties coming in?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. Sheriff, unless you want to come and speak to that? No, we're not planning. Okay, so the sheriff's answer is no, no plans right now to contract with any other counties other than Dane. Thank you. All right, if no other questions on the sheriff's office, we'll move ahead to circuit court. So on page 29 begins the comments for circuit court. Circuit court, we really break that down into the circuit court, the mediation and family court services, and the clerk of court. So that's why you see them, those three broken out separately. So revenue for the circuit court, you can see several increases. While those look like some pretty big increases, there also are some increased costs involved there as well. So some nice increases on the circuit court side, but some decreases as well. For example, I mentioned child support earlier. Child support also has contracts with the courts and the clerk of court for services they provide, again, so that we can recoup 2/3 of those funds, and they will fluctuate from year to year. Not significant changes in revenue for mediation. Clerk of court, also some increases year over year that you can see listed there, including for investment interest, interest on judgments, and charges to county departments. On the expenditure side, here's some of the bigger increases. For the circuit court, you can see that attorney's fees are up by $350,000. This is what you may have heard of before, where we just have challenges having enough attorneys, hiring private attorneys. And so when we can't get attorneys, the cost comes back on the county. And so those are costs that have gone up. Likewise, indigent counsel fees go up when folks can't afford attorneys and the county has to pay for that. You'll also see interpreter fees are going up. On the clerk of court side, no significant cost increases really. If you flip to page 31, the thing to highlight there at the top is that the clerk has asked on behalf of the courts for an audiovisual equipment upgrade and replacement. That's the $775,000 project that I think I may have alluded to in previous conversations. This would replace equipment that's now 7 years old in 4 courtrooms and the jury assembly room. So this is something that previously has been in the ROC IT budget. ROC IT did not prioritize including that, thinking that we could get by 1 more year. I know that the court staff have a different opinion as to the need to move on that sooner. But nonetheless, I did not recommend that given the cost and again, the pressure on the sales tax, which we'd use to fund that. So, just be aware that may be something that if is not funded in '25, you'll continue to hear about. We've already had some challenges with that, some glitches that already as that gets near its end of life. So just something that you need to be aware of that may be an issue going forward. Personnel side, the circuit court's requesting reallocations of 6 judicial assistants. That would cost just over $18,000. I did not recommend that in the budget, again, due to competing priorities and pressure. You can see what the overtime budget is here. No change for both the circuit court account and the clerk account. So overall tax levy in the circuit court is an increase, about $35,000. Mediation is an increase of $160,000, and then in the clerk of circuit court account, the decrease is just over $100,000. So overall, $67,000 decrease in tax levy support needed by the court system. Questions? If not, we'll move on to the 911 center. Not a whole lot of changes going on at 911. Largely what you'll see here are a variety of reductions to specific accounts. So if you look under expenditures on page 36, you can see kind of a listing there of several things that the department has requested decrease. This is a good example of one way that a department, public safety department, fully levy funded, was looking for opportunities to be responsive to the direction that I asked them to do, to all departments to do, to kind of find ways to dial back a little bit on costs. There was one request for radio positions at the 2 new backup consoles. So during the construction project out there, we added on a little bit of space for 911, and there's some backup training space in there that we don't have radio consoles for. Those aren't used regularly to dispatch, would be more of a backup kind of a situation. But I did not recommend the $41,500 for that for the same purposes. I haven't recommended many things. So as you can see there, no personnel requests. You can see what the overtime budget is, and that the overall tax levy is an increase of just about $12,000, less than 1% from the prior year. Questions on 911? Next then is the district attorney's budget. You can see on page 46 of the PS&J section, there's that fees are down a little bit. You can see that just sort of the trends there leading to that reduction. One thing to highlight is state aid for victim witness, state reimbursement. That's projected to be at 56.5% next year, which is a decrease of about $6,000 from the prior year. Sometimes I get a little over-exuberant about how much money we might actually get from the state, and then I'm reminded from year to year that I shouldn't trust the state is going to make good on their efforts necessarily in this area. At one point, that was supposed to be funded at much higher level than that. I would note, though, that going into the next biennial budget cycle, this is going to be one of the priorities of the Counties Association to try to get more state funding to increase the percentage that we're funded for the victim witness program. In the expenditure account, again, this is another example of a department that you can see several accounts, line items that the department has requested decrease to try to be responsive to the need to find some savings in the department. You've got both you've got the prosecution account, deferred prosecution program, and victim witness, and as you can see across all of them, not a whole lot of changes really. Personnel, there was a significant personnel request here, was the reallocation of 12 legal support specialists at a cost of $57,000. There's reallocation of the legal support specialists and then the administrative supervisor. All had related requests, and you could, for purposes of compression, when you increase one and then kind of increase the next. Like other parts of the budget, other parts of the workforce, I think in the district attorney's office, we're seeing some challenges recruiting in our current environment, recruiting and retaining staff, and that was, I think, the impetus for the request. And nonetheless, I have not recommended that simply because of the cost of it, the availability of funding. Overall, in the DA's office, an increase of about 3.4% in the tax levy. Questions about the district attorney's recommended budget? If not, emergency management. So this is the first, 2025 be the first really kind of full year after a year of, I guess the second full year, but the first full year after operations, after the county board agreed to remove that function from the sheriff's office. So there's still several changes that we're making as we're trying to work out, figure out kind of what the needs are for emergency management. So one thing to note on the revenue side is that state aid is going down by $10,000, about 11.6% from just that general federal emergency management program grant that we get. So that's a reduction that will affect operations. We also get state aid for hazmat and local emergency planning for the LEPC, and a minor amount for fees related to hazmat. I'll talk about the sales tax and expenditures. So several things to note in the operational budget for emergency management. The other contracted services line item is $77,000. In 2024, as we were getting going, the board approved $100,000 in one-time funding from sales tax, just in case there was needs there we didn't anticipate. Anticipating that would just be, used again for one-time purposes. What we've determined is that we really do need some funding here from year to year, and more so because of the decrease in, not only the decrease that we're getting in state aid, but the state has also taken a decrease from the federal government, so they're not as able to offer as many options, training options, exercise options for us as they have in the past, and so we need to make sure we're doing that ourselves. So that $77,000 there is an increase because it's a levy-funded cost, but that, again, will be for training and exercising. There's funding for software maintenance that's noted there, some repair and maintenance services to the 41 tornado sirens that we have. That's an increase in cost. Those things are continuing to get old, so it costs more from year to year to maintain those. We learned how important those were to have maintained this year, of course. And there's still some costs in here as we're outfitting the new EOC, some laptops and PC money budgeted for some spaces we need to fill. You can see the cost for the hazmat team. We contracted City of Janesville for hazmat services. There's about just under $10,000 increase in 2025. About $57,000 of the total amount is funded by the levy, so most of it. We're including $8,000 in 2025 for a full-scale hazmat exercise next year. So that's one of the reasons you see the increase there. If you flip the page on to page 56, again, I won't go through all these things. One thing I will note is in the spirit of things that we've learned, there's a little bit of money, not a whole lot, that's added to the emergency management budget for incidental kinds of things. Again, one thing we learned from the tornado in February was that in the heat of the moment there's some things that emergency management could do to help facilitate response, such things as, just water and on-site toilets and refueling services just to keep things running as a central, kind of coordinator. And so we put a little money in there for that purpose, only $5,500, but just a little bit to help keep things moving if needed. Capital requests, in 2025, a new outdoor warning siren at cost of $25,000 is requested. Typically, this is a funding that we use from year to year to replace an old siren. But in discussions with the department, the priority was really to get a new siren at the Rock River Heritage Park, which will fill space where there really isn't coverage right now. And so it's the priority in 2025 is a new siren and not a replacement siren. It's also a new portable radio as well that is recommended, and both those to come from the sales tax. I will note in here the request for the command trailer. This is something that we have been working on. The command trailer that we have right now, is many years old and has been up for discussion for many budget cycles as to whether or not to replace it. So the request came in. We put the full cost of the trailer in here, which is $1.4 million. We have been working with the City of Janesville to share these costs. Going forward, we also worked with the City of Beloit as to whether or not they wanted to be involved, but it looks like at this point that they have a fairly new and a very nice trailer that they have, and so it looks like that we're going to continue to talk with the City of Janesville about splitting these costs, but not in 2025. Simply not enough funding available, and so we'll look at that in 2026. There's one personnel action that was requested that I am recommending, which is a reallocation of the deputy director. I think just based on a year's worth of experience and the duties that position is performing, that is the right decision to make. So overall levy is going up quite a bit for emergency management, 58.3%. That's $155,000. And again, part of that is to some of the sales tax we had in there last year that is being replaced by tax levy, amongst other things. Any questions regarding emergency management budget? Medical examiner's budget is next. So on the revenue side, I noted this for several years now, since 2015, where there's a state law that limits the increase in fees in the ME's office. Next year, that increase for the CPI would be about 3.6%. So we are recommending the cremation fee increase by 3.3%. That would take it up to $285 from $276. However, we expect fewer cremations based on last year's budget. So we will see overall revenue decrease by about 17% here. Expenditures, no change on overtime budget. You can see the description at the bottom of page 60 about our contract with Dane County. There'll be about a 2.7%, or about $10,000 increase in our contract with Dane County for medical examiner services, and you can see the different costs for the various services they provide to the county. The biggest increase in the ME's budget is for the building lease. They will be moving into the space that was vacated by the Community Corrections Office. So that's the space out behind where UW Extension is, next to the health department there, where the ME's office will be moving into and out of the healthcare center. So that's not really, that is an increased cost for there, but it's just an allocation of costs that comes back into the facilities management budget. No personnel requests, so overall, the tax levy for the ME's office is an increase of $190,000 or 23.4%, due largely to that building lease allocation and the decrease in revenue from cremations. Questions about the medical examiner's budget? Next is child support. So as I mentioned on a couple of occasions, again, good revenue from child support, where the federal government will cover 66% of most of the expenditures. You can see what that totals in 2025. One thing to note, which you'll see later on, is there's sort of been a change in how we include things in that formula. So some indirect cost reimbursement is now, that was separate before, is included in there now, which, so while this cost goes up in the federal revenue account, you'll see later that, that because of the changes that does result in an increase in the tax levy at the bottom line. You see state revenue as well. We expect to see a small increase there for performance standards. Expenditures, I would jump down to expenditures then. You can see here the interdepartmental charges. That's where I referenced earlier the charges to the circuit court and the clerk of court for services that they provide, as well as the intergovernmental charges now to the sheriff's office that I mentioned before as well. So a significant increase there. Overall, not a whole lot of change. The department has requested that we reduce one administrative assistant position to half-time as a way of saving some money and based on what we think we can accomplish going forward. And that is recommended, and the staff individual in that role is agreeable to that. And so that's a win-win for everybody. So overall, you can see here, as I noted before, with the changes in the federal reimbursement and the indirect costs, overall, we're seeing an increase in the tax levy year over year. Questions about child support? The next section is evidence-based decision-making. Not a department, but is an account where we put money to fund some of our justice kind of reform efforts. So we have a couple different grants in here that we use for a variety of services, but mostly to fund our contracted vendor Justice Point for pretrial services. We also have some of the allocated opioid settlement funds in here that we pay Justice Point to do assessments of justice-involved individuals to determine their treatment needs. So you can read through here and see what the different programs that we provide are. Overall, the total levy for these programs is $529,000, which is the same amount as the prior year. Any questions about EBDM? If not, then we will flip back again, and we will go to the Planning and Development Committee section.
Prairie Lakes,
What library?
Prairie Lakes Library.
I think that's next. Planning is first.
Okay.
Prairie Lakes. So we'll start with real property. Real property comments in that section start on page 7. So real property, there's really two sections to real property. There's the normal real property listing, and then there's land records. And you can see listed here the different revenue sources. Land records has fees from abstractors, and then fees based on transfer activity in the Register of Deeds office. And you can see what those are in 2025 as well. We also use fund balance every year to offset some of our costs for land records activities. When you think about land records, when you look at expenditures below, you can see in several departments there are land records related costs that we can fund under state law by these funds, and so some of that is funded as well. You can see the fund balance at the end of 2024 is estimated to be just over $550,000 for land records. Again, they're very specific things that we can use to fund in state law, and that will fluctuate from year to year depending on how much is used in the budget and what the receipts are through the Registered Deeds Office. So you can see under expenditures, this is start to list the kinds of items that the Land Records Program will fund in the various departments. And then in the main account, you can see kind of in the real property account where the expenditures are as well. And that does fund, Land Records does fund the costs of the staff in real property based on the percentage of work that they devote to Land Records funds. So overall, no personal changes. Land Records has no tax levy, and for real property, there's a 3.2% increase, which only is a little over $6,500. Any questions about Land Records or the real property lister's budget? Then planning and development. Planning and development truly is what you would call a cost to continue budget with some overall reductions, as I've noted in the other departments. So you can see here in the revenue, there's several sources of revenue that aren't hugely significant. But I would note that there are some zoning permits we charge for, and there's a fee schedule in the back of this section. And so those are incorporated into what you approve when you approve the budget. So you may want to look at those and ask any questions if you'd like. From an expenditure standpoint, again, largely cost to continue. The one thing I would note on the personnel side is there's a .4 deputy surveyor position that is being recommended to be deleted. It's been deleted, or it's been vacant, I'm sorry, for several years. We've not funded it actually, so even though we've left it on the books, it's not been funded in 2024, so there's really no cost savings associated. But we're going ahead and moving ahead to delete that, again, kind of based on feedback and interest we've gotten from the board about vacant positions, and if they've not been filled in some time, then cleaning those up and moving them off the books. So even though that wasn't funded, the cost of that, if we were to fill it, would have been about $35,000. Overall, tax levy for the planning department is $671,000. That's a $17,000, 2.5% decrease. And then we have a little summary here of the housing program. Won't go into too much detail here other than we have these federal housing funds that we get through the CDGB and Home Fund, largely for folks who qualify based on income. And so it's been an initiative of the department and the planning committee for several years now to identify ways to get more of those out the door. And so we've noted some of those things that are going on to try to do that, including most recently efforts to try to provide some funding to the victims of our weather-related housing damage around the county. So certainly Andrew can speak to that more if you have questions about the housing program. Any questions about planning and development committees or the planning and development agency's budget? So if not, I'm going to go off script here for a minute and go to the Land Conservation Department so that Andrew can go home, since he's the department head of two departments which are not situated alphabetically next to each other. So if you were to flip back to the section for the Ag and Extension Committee, or I'm sorry, the Ag and Land Conservation Committee, it's the second yellow section following County Board. So if you start in the front, you'll see the County Board section. There you'll see the Ag and Land Conservation Committee section. We're going to skip UW Extension and come back to that later, but I'm going to go through land conservation briefly here because, like the Planning Department, from an expenditure standpoint, it is also a cost to continue budget with several savings elements to it. So in that section, on page 20, is where the administrator's comments are for land conservation. Give everybody just a minute here to get there. So the first thing that you notice is that state aid is down about a 22% decrease of state aid or $35,000. And that's due to a formula the state has that's based partially on positions in the department. We've had some vacancies there that we recently filled some, but still vacancies, and so that's why that is down over prior years. You can see here several other accounts land conservation has, groundwater nitrate being one. That's funded from ATC funds received in prior years, which still has about $72,000 of fund balance in it. We've used $18,000 a year for the past several years for that project. You can also see clean sweep. There's a clean sweep account that's noted here. The PACE program, which always gets a lot of attention, anticipates 2 easements in 2025. That's just over $1.2 million. And if you flip the page to page 21, you can see what the funding sources for those are. Of note is that there's the $200,000 in sales tax that was on that pie graph that I showed you before, and the use of sales tax last Thursday. You can see we get some federal aid that we're anticipating. The lease revenue from Alliant Energy's solar farmland lease that I put on the screen last time as well is going to the PACE program. We have some carryover funds for completing some projects that didn't get done in the prior year, as well as some fund balance usage to make everything balance out. So overall, we have a PACE fund balance that's got $426,000 in it as of 12/31/23. You can see if you jump down to county farm, just to note there that the farm lease that we have covering that property out on the campus on the north side of Janesville does offset costs elsewhere in the budget. So we have revenue of about $115,000 that can be used elsewhere in the county budget. Expenditures, a few things to note. Of significance is that the plan is for the Land Conservation Department to move from its current lease space out on Highway 14 back into the courthouse to be co-located where the planning department is right now. So not only does that result in some cost savings, just in the lease itself, about $20,000 a year, but that will allow the staff to work collaboratively together. Will be certainly much more efficient for the department head, who has to split his time during every day to drive out back and forth between those two departments. We've talked about most of these other accounts on the revenue side. There is one request for a personnel change. The department's requesting to eliminate one administrative professional position that would save almost $66,000. That was just based on the fact that we have an administrative professional out at Land Conservation and a different administrative professional level here in the courthouse for planning, and so trying to be efficient and consolidate that as those two departments are coming together in one location. Overall, decrease in tax levy for land conservation of about 20%, about $43,000 less than the prior year. Questions about the land conservation budget?
Supervisor Ryan.
Can you explain what non-metallic mining is and the other fees for 10,000?
Sure. So I could explain non-metallic mining, but there's probably better people to explain that. So Andrew, if you're in the room, do you want to come up and talk about non-metallic mining fees and what's in that?
Thank goodness I can stretch my legs. Thank you. Good evening, board members. Yeah, non-metallic mine reclamation is for all our sand and gravel and quarry operations in the county. So we have 47 or 48 total mine sites in the county. So the county has a countywide ordinance that requires operators to restore those sites in some form or fashion, depending on the plan that they have for each site. So it's a statewide model ordinance that's administered by the county. So as part of that, we collect annual fees from the operators to cover some of the costs of overseeing those operations and that administration. You had a question about the other fees?
Yes, sir, about the $10,000, I guess, for miscellaneous or something.
Let's see. It's this,
It's in the same sentence. It's in the same sentence.
yeah, so here, so miscellaneous fees and other fees, so we've got the different groups there.
Okay, so yeah, we have fees for other permits, other projects. We have fees related to our tree sales. So it's just kind of a general revenue source for some of the things that we do, again, to offset the costs of doing business. And there is, I believe, the more detailed fee schedule is in the budget document, where those are kind of itemized out, how much we charge for different permits and different types of things.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Andrew while he's up here? All right, thanks, Andrew.
All right, thank you.
So if we're done with land conservation, then I will take you back again to the back where we left off, now to Prairie Lakes Library System. So that's kind of in the middle. It'll maybe take you a minute to find it again, since I kind of took us off our sequence of where we were with the planning department. Give you a minute to find that. So while you're everybody's finishing up finding that section, Prairie Lakes Library System, formerly Arrowhead Library System. That is the other limited levy that we have. So again, outside levy limits. And so that is, because again, it's not taxed on all real property in the county. So there's several things really the county pays for through that. Basically, it's services that libraries provide to rural Rock County residents, whether it's from municipalities in the county or municipalities or other counties outside of the county. So you can see here, if you jump down to expenditures, this kind of shows where the money goes. One thing to point out, if you look on page 3, under that second bullet there, all the way back to 1997, when the county board made a decision about how it's going to fund libraries, I always just want to point this out because it is a difference in how the board funds libraries versus how the state requires they be funded. And so there's two different formulas that are used. The county formula generally over all the libraries provides the libraries more funding than the board is required to under the state funding formula. From year to year, though, there are specific libraries that are funded at a higher level by the state formula, and then they must have that. That's the minimum that they must be able to receive. So you can see here at the bottom of page 3, the amounts that are going to each participating library in the county, and then to other libraries outside of the county for the intersystem agreement. Overall-
Schwartz, I'm sorry.
yeah.
You had a question.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, can you sort of help me understand, since this is fairly new to me, what is the formula for the Prairie Lakes piece? I mean, is it,
So-
without going into a
Yeah,
complex?
yeah. So at a very high level, like the county formula is based on the local appropriation for each as the base. So the county formula says, what is your municipal appropriation every year? And then depending on the percentage use of that library by rural residents, then that's what is paid. The per unit cost based on the local appropriation. The state law is based on the cost per circulation. And so the county has to reimburse 70% of the cost per circulation then for each rural resident that uses that library. So they end up being really similar sometimes, but they can vary. It depends, and again, it depends on the decision of the municipality on what their library appropriation is. So if it's higher or if it's lower, then we reimburse a percentage of that. So if a municipality wanted to invest a lot of money in their library, then that is the base. So we'd pay more as a percentage of that. So that's why they can vary.
Okay, so it is based off the total overall cost that library is running at, and then either 70% or this other formula is raised.
Yeah. For the purposes of the county's formula that funds most libraries, it's based on the municipal appropriation. Really, for the The other one is sort of based on it, but through the, the circulation, which is, the cost per circ is also based on the just, kind of their costs. But it's just a little different way of thinking about it.
Thank you.
Supervisor Fugelseth.
Thank you, Chair. The percentage of use by residents, do you know if that's determined by the number of visits to the library, the number of items checked out, if it's like a hard copy book or an electronic download?
Yeah, so think about it more as circulation, than a visit per se. So they track, circulation. So if I'm a rural resident, which I am, and I'd say I go to the Milton Library. I live in the town of Harmony. I go to the Milton Library, and I check out one book. That counts as one unit. If I go and I check out 5, that's 5 circulation, and so that counts more. And so then that's the basis is circulation and not visit per se. But electronic is not included. So it's just hard copy things, even though electronic is becoming much more popular, obviously. That's not included in the formula.
Supervisor Schwartz.
Thanks, Chair. Just one more real quick question on who actually, the tax for the what municipalities? Is it just Footville, basically, or is there a group of municipalities that are actually paying this tax?
Could you repeat the question again? I missed what you're saying.
So what municipalities are actually paying for Prairie Lakes? Is it just Footville or that Orfordville? Where is it? Or is
Oh,
it
I see.
Is it countywide?
Yeah, right. So not countywide. So any municipality that has its own library doesn't pay for Prairie Lake. So think of it as Footville doesn't have a library and none of the towns have their own library. So that they all are then, if their resident goes to Beloit, let's say, and checks out something, that's where that counts for us to pay Prairie Lakes, through the system to fund
Thank
that.
you. Thanks.
Supervisor Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Josh, do you know, so public libraries are not just used for people to check out books. They're used for computer usage. So like the county was in a partnership with the libraries to install like software for business owners to go in and be able to build business plans and so things like that. There's spaces for people to take their children, for literacy programs and things like that. So libraries are not just for people to check out books. They're community spaces as well. So do you know if that's taken into consideration?
It is not, and I'll give you an example. I've asked the question as for many years as the electronic, just an example, electronic media is increased use, and because that would increase the total circulations, which would sort of essentially it would decrease the cost, and therefore it'd be less funding that would go from the counties to the libraries if you increased, on other measures. And so there's been a hesitancy, I think, to change that because it would change, overall the cost per circulation in the libraries. So it's just continued to remain with, largely those hard copy books as a funding, the funding unit. And I'd invite, Supervisor Wilson, if you have anything you want to add about how this all works, better than I do.
Supervisor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm the Rock County representative to the Prairie Lakes Board. Basically, what this is all about is those areas of the counties that don't directly tax for library services paying for library service. So it's a reimbursement. I guess I would characterize the funding formula as being sort of a substitute or a surrogate measure to determine what is owed. Libraries do offer lots of programs. Libraries do offer computers, things that aren't being counted. This is I guess, the fairest way of counting that has been discovered. Residents in non-municipalities under the state formula get a pretty good deal in that the state is requiring no more than 70% of the total cost. So it's not even a total cost reimbursement, it's a portion. And think of the measurement and the metrics as being sort of a surrogate measure that shows how much the town of Harmony is using libraries, how much the town of or Footville is using libraries and so on.
Thank you.
Other questions about the Prairie Lakes portion of the budget? If not, we'll go to Human Services. So again, that's your new handout, since it's excluded from the spiral-bound version that you have. So again, Human Services, our largest department, so there's several different subsections here, and I'll go through each individually and just offer some highlights and then pause for question. I would note to start off, though, at the very beginning, which would be numbered as page 25 on your handout, that again, this is another area like Public Works where we've taken a little time to kind of highlight the strategy behind some of the decisions that we've made in the budget and some of the strategies that the department has employed in thinking about how to reduce its overall costs. So you can see there in the Human Services Department, part of it has been about positions of the, as you'll note in the handout that I referenced earlier about positions, that the large majority of position reductions in the budget occurred in the Human Services Department, and we'll touch on those as we go through that. In addition, there is another decision they made about some fund balance they have for economic support and how much of that could be used, again, to reduce tax levy needs, both for some ongoing costs and some one-time costs in the budget, which are highlighted again on page 25. So I'll start in with the Children, Youth, and Families programs, which you can see what those are highlighted there at the top of that section. Of note, the Birth to 3 program, which is well-known. Revenue there is anticipated to go up by about just under $80,000. CLTS, which is the Children's Long-Term Support Program. This is, again, one of those fully-ish, almost fully federally funded programs that we get just significant increases every year, fully funded from the federal government. And so you can see here that we get about $16.2 million, which is an increase of $2.5 million from 2024, or 18.7%. So as you think about, increases in costs in the county budget and where they're going up, keep in mind that some of those are not certainly not levy funded, but they're funded by other sources. Expenditures, so we'll talk a little bit about out-of-home placements. You'll see the charts in here that I referenced during the budget presentation for out-of-home placements for children and youth. So I won't go over all that again. I touched on it the other day, but you can see here the breakdown in the different kinds of placements, both for foster care and in the state correctional facilities, which we continue to not use now since 2017. So you can see overall that about $3.3 million out-of-home placements, which is about an 8% decrease from the 2024 budget. If you flip the page to page 28, again, we're talking about expenditures for Birth to 3. Again, the same amount of, similar amount of increase in expenditures to revenue. Expenditures in CLTS, again, largely the same as on the revenue side that I talked about before. Also highlight here at the Youth Services Center, expenditures expected to decrease to just under $4.7 million, just a minor decrease. We are currently housing some of our youth in other counties due to some staffing challenges. We expect to have the result by the end of the year and a more normalized budget going forward. Also highlighted the shelter care services with Derek's House, about $1.1 million for 10 youth down at the facility in Beloit. So several personnel-related changes to go through here. Overall, 9 positions in Child Protective Services that would be deleted. This is part of the department's evaluation of what it can still get by with and certainly meet caseload standards. Many of these have been vacant for some period of time, and it's just a recognition of the reality that it's going to be challenging to fill those positions. As you will see here, and we've done, really throughout the budget in different places, when there's been a reduction in FTE, we have made some other changes to try to offset the need to provide services. So, for example, what you see here at the bottom, page 28, where we talk about these position deletions with a pretty significant cost savings, we do have some cost for a reclass of a supervisor position to be able to provide more support to both supervisors and staff and free up some time for the program manager to focus on higher level things. But overall, these changes result in a savings of over $600,000. And you can see the list below that of the specific positions that we're talking about.
Supervisor Sutherland has a question.
Thank you, Chair Levy. Josh, out of the 9 FTE positions that they're requesting to delete, how many are filled?
I believe all of these are vacant. Yes.
Okay.
I'm looking
Thank
I'm looking at Kate. I think all of the CPS positions are vacant. No. Oh, one is not vacant right now. Thank you, Kate.
Is Supervisor Schwartz?
Thanks, Chair. And I'm sure I'll be asking this question quite a bit as we go through each point. But to go with what Supervisor Sutherland was saying is to understand which ones were filled or not filled. I noticed a lot of these charts and things don't have the determination of the eliminated positions, whether they are filled or not. Is there a way we could get a better summary of that so we can really get a understanding of by area what is being done? Because I'm sure some of this might be restructuring, some of it might be, if the filled positions are really coming out of one spot or one or two spots, I'd like to understand why we think we can do without them now and where we hadn't been able to in the past.
Yeah, we can certainly give you a list that shows which positions currently have people in them, if you want to see it. Some of those I probably can speak to. So for your point, you begin to see some of that here. So for example, in the list that's on page 29, you can see one of the positions is this analyst position. And so that is the one that Kate was referring to that has someone in it. And that's part of this bigger picture strategy that we'll talk about more when we get to the administrative side, where the department's kind of rethinking how it does its analytical work. Instead of having staff on staff for doing that, looking at a couple of things, contracting out potentially for certain things, or training other staff on new software package that we're kind of moving forward with a countywide. That's a Microsoft package. So, to your point, it is in some cases it is concentrated in some areas, like in that analytical quality improvement section that we'll talk about later, which kind of includes this analyst position as well.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Holman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Josh, got a question for you. I know this is kind of bouncing off of what the other guys have been asking that question, but I'm also going, okay, we're going to look at this elimination of these jobs and such, and you were talking about possible movement of people throughout the department retraining. Are we also taking into consideration of natural, what's the word I'm looking for? Doggone, I had it a second ago. Natural, as far as retirements going out through the course of the year, instead of just doing it as a blanket cut, bang, now, go, and we know that we're going to lose maybe 2 or 3 here, say next March, or we're going to lose, 1 just after December, something like that. Do we have that, natural attrition? That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, so there's a couple examples throughout the entire list of reductions that are included in the budget where we do know people are have said they're retiring. And so, we know that that softens it a little bit because, even though they're included in the list now of somebody's in that position and there'd be a layoff, they have told us they intend to retire. And so we don't expect that to have the same effect it would be on somebody who, is not ready to retire. So there is some of that. But I would say that generally speaking, we did not take the strategy and I did not take the approach of trying to solicit folks who might be near retirement, to offer them a sweetener, right? If they were to go, they would get a payment of some sort, to bring that kind of a program to you, or to wait until March. Essentially, the analysis that we asked the departments to do was look across your workforce, and if there's a position that you think, for whatever reason, like I described earlier in the sort of the quality improvement section, human services, or a position that you just feel like you can maybe get by with doing without, regardless of whether it's filled or not. That marginal position we really need to be taking a look at. So there wasn't really the thought of waiting until mid-year of '25 until somebody's going to retire, because often we don't really know, right? They don't always tell us a year, 6 months in advance about that. And so we didn't, other than a couple of folks in this group, we didn't really take that into account.
Supervisor Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at the positions that are being deleted, and I see they're they're different positions. So it's Human Services Professional 1, Human Services Professional 1 Lead, Human Services Professional 2, so on and so forth. So they're very, none of them are repeated. So my question is this the only analyst position that's being deleted?
So there is another senior analyst position that is not in CPS, that is located under sort of the admin area that you'll see at the back of this.
Okay.
So there'll be a second analyst position, and then a sort of the supervisor of that position that's also being recommended to be deleted.
So there's a senior analyst that's being deleted and an analyst. So the analyst positions that exist are both going.
Well, there's several analyst positions in the department that aren't, I mean, there's a lot of analyst positions in the department, the various programs, and so there's only a couple that are being included here throughout this for deletion. And so there's several analyst positions that will remain, but there's a couple that are being recommended for deletion.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Shorts.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. One other thing to add on to the discrepancy of whether the positions were filled or not filled, also the dollar impact by position would be helpful as well, to really get a feel for where, are these, for lack of a better term, are these paper positions being reduced, or are they actually the real, and what are the impacts of that?
So if you look on this handout we gave you tonight with the positions, if you turn to the second page for deletions, it will have the cost of each of those positions included there. So you will see that. It doesn't have a summary, but that does have the cost for each of those positions included.
Right, so now it would just be, are they filled or non-filled? So, okay, that would be very helpful if we had that added. Thanks.
Yep.
Supervisor Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going back a little bit before personnel. Can you give me a little bit of background as far as Derek's house? Because I'm looking at that $1.1 million for 10 youth. And then I look at all of these personnel cuts, and I'm just trying to figure out like the rationale for $1.1 million for 10 kids and trying to wrap my head around that. I think we've discussed it before, but I just wanted kind of a refresher.
Yeah, and maybe it'd be good to have Kate come up and address this specifically.
Good evening, thanks for the opportunity. So Derek's House is our shelter care contract. So we're serving youth at Derek's House who we have custody of through Child Protective Services or Youth Justice, who really, when you think of shelter, there's nowhere else for them to go. They're often in between placements, or we're waiting to find a placement or to resolve issues that allow us to reunify those kids. If we didn't have Derek's House, we would be required to be placing these kids out of county in group homes or other higher cost residential placements. And so the capacity for Derek's House is a max of 10, and that's the overall expenditure is the 1.1 million. but the average daily cost for any youth is comparable to or less than what we would be paying to place that child out of the county in another facility when you look at the average daily rates of those other facilities. And so the actual cost benefit to us is notable. It's at least comparable based on our data historically to what we would be paying elsewhere. And the huge benefit is that this service allows us to keep kids local and keep them more connected with their community, their schools, resources, and families.
Supervisor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kate, would the example of a hotel work here in terms of the capacity of the hotel might be 50 rooms, but there are a whole lot more people that stay in the 50 rooms over the course of the year. So in terms of Derek's house, we may be talking about a capacity of 10, but there are more youth served. Is that correct?
That's correct. And so the average length of stay currently at Derek's house is maybe about 30 to 90 days. That might be a little bit long. And so 10 kids at any given time are the max capacity. And kids are coming in and out throughout the year.
And I guess if I can ask a question, that looking at the cuts that we have here, not only in this department, but other departments, are we nervous that our services would suffer if we're cutting several positions?
So Kate, do you want to talk about the examples in human services at least?
Sure. So we were thoughtful and thought deeply and explored a lot of opportunities when we looked at how we could submit a responsible budget that included personnel reductions without sacrificing services to clients. So we developed a set of criteria that we used when we did this evaluation. I engaged management team staff in this effort as well. We looked at what reductions can we make and what efficiencies can we achieve. And the criteria that we used is really that we wanted to avoid directly decreasing services to clients or eliminating programs that provide essential services to clients in the community. We also considered that those aren't just the direct service positions, but a lot of the support positions that provide support to our mandated programs, to our client-serving programs, our administrative professionals, our accounting staff, the analysts that provide services to mandated programs. We evaluated those as well and did not want to be irresponsible about putting programs in a position where we've eliminated supportive positions that they need to get the work done. We asked our managers and we evaluated ourselves, where do we have opportunities for increased efficiencies? Are there more efficient ways to accomplish certain operations than how we are currently doing so? Whether that then opens doors for discussions about staffing reductions. We had those conversations. And we looked at whether changes or eliminations in personnel would have adverse effect on the county's liability or ability to meet statutory obligations for mandated programs. And so we were thoughtful about our proposed budget when we looked at proposed eliminations. We scoured through our vacancies as our first source of opportunity. And as the county administrator said, we have had workforce challenges around getting positions filled for the last several years, and so we were just realistic about positions that even if we wanted to fill them to maximize services, if we don't think it's likely that this position's going to be filled in the near future, it doesn't make sense to keep it in the budget if it's vacant. So there was a lot of consideration, and I guess that's a long way of answering your question.
Thank you. Thank you. Supervisor Belkey, then
I didn't even have to put my number up. Thank you, sir. Could you tell me the difference between the assistant program manager versus subcare supervisor titles?
Assistant program manager.
Looks like you're adding that. Are they the same titles? Same thing,
I'm
different?
just looking for, which program area?
What page are you on, Supervisor Belke? Is there a,
Sorry?
what page are you on, like on the?
Not on the page.
Oh, okay. I thought you were looking at a specific
Nope.
reduction. Okay.
I'm not familiar with assistant program manager as a position title.
Supervisor Belke, are you looking at that on a handout or somewhere where we can?
I'm trying to find it again. Hold on. Where's the- Okay. Give me a moment, sorry.
Okay. And we can certainly double back, Josh, if you want to. I mean, Supervisor Schwartz, I apologize.
No worries. Thanks, Chair. Just a quick question. I know that she's circling. So there was the majority of these positions were not filled. How many unfilled positions are we still looking at, even after all this? And then how many of them are actually mostly levy funded?
I don't know that I have, well, let me try your first question first. Unfilled positions beyond what we've proposed in our budget that we're continuing to look at for elimination or
Yes.
reduction?
Start with that, yeah.
Yes. So every time we have a vacancy that we are proposing to fill, we evaluate that vacancy. And so there's a process that our managers have to go through and an analysis on a form they have to submit to me that describes the justification for filling that vacant position. We are evaluating that every position we get. And so we have some anticipated vacancies coming up where we think we can not fill them. It's a constant process every time we have a vacancy.
Right, but I know earlier in the year it was in the 60s, some number.
Oh, the total number of current
Yeah,
vacancies?
and where are we sit, yeah, because and how many of those still, obviously, take out the however many, 18 or whatever it is we pulled out.
So our most updated vacancy data is from the 19th of September. We have a lot of fluctuations, but it looks like, and I'm going to ask Sarah to correct me if I'm not interpreting this correctly. Our data shows that we have 63.65 vacancies as of that date, and of those, 21.05 are proposed to be deleted. Remaining would be 42.6 vacancies.
In the 40s.
And, well, yes, is that accurate? Yep, that's right.
That's about right, yeah,
Yep.
I thought it was somewhere in the 40s.
Yep, it's in the
But
40s.
the big question, yeah, and then of that, how, it's that same exercise, how old are they? How are they funded? How long have they been open? So the question where I'm really leading is, are there more positions that some of these people could be repurposed to that could be filled? Because I'm assuming if you're leaving them open, you want to fill them. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, if we're leaving them open and we haven't proposed to delete them, we want to fill them and we expect to be able to.
Okay, all right, that's really where I was going. Thank you.
Supervisor Belke?
Okay. I'm still trying to figure out all these terms. Okay, so I was just reading in here, we're deleting the 9 positions, and then the human service supervisor, 1 position, pay grade M, to human services lead supervisor, pay grade 0. So we're giving a supervisor a raise?
It's a reclassification from a supervisor to a lead supervisor to help provide additional support in our Child Protective Services area. So that is a reclass request that is part of kind of the overall strategy to provide adequate support and leadership in that area.
So M to O Is that a higher amount? I don't really know what that
Yes,
is.
M to O is a promotion, and that's based on the current pay, the pay grid that exists currently, and where the Human Services Lead Supervisor already exists on the pay grid. So that's where it's currently classified, must be, yeah.
So we're going to eliminate some positions and promote or give more money to a supervisor, right? Am I right?
Well, that is part of the overall staffing strategy, yes. Not just giving the person money, it's a promotion that requires additional responsibilities. One of the challenges that we have is we have a large supervisory team, a lot going on, and significant need for case oversight and supervision. And we can't have a supervisor, we need to have a lead supervisor to help with supervision of supervisors. That's the problem we're working to resolve through reclassification.
So the large supervision team is people supervising children? Is that what you mean? Or do you mean all these supervisors? I'm trying to figure out the terms here.
A supervisor in Child Protective Services provides supervision of a team of staff.
Okay.
And those staff are serving children and families in our Chapter 48 child welfare system. And so there are ratio kind of recommendations for supervisor to staff ratio, for staff to client ratio. And so those are the caseload standards that we are working to maintain while we're organizing and making sure that we have adequate supports.
What's the typical ratio? I'm just wondering.
So the best practice ratio for, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we're within standards right now, I can tell you that, and even with the elimination of these positions. But I think the ideal ratio for supervisor to staff in child welfare practice is 1 to 6, somewhere in that range. And then our supervisors need support as well. Child Protective Services is it's not just the casework. There's a lot that happens from a community engagement level, a state engagement level, policy, procedure, engagement with other stakeholders, and that program manager is required to prioritize a lot of those requirements, roles, and activities. It is not possible for someone to juggle all of that while they're also supervising cases. And so the restructure of that reclassification of the position helps us redistribute responsibilities so that we're having adequate supervision of cases and the ability to play that management role externally with other stakeholders.
Supervisor Woodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Kate basically answered what I was going to say, but I know we've discussed this before in committee that when you've reclassified things and someone's taking more responsibility, if we've eliminated 2 jobs to make 1, that yes, a pay raise does go along with it, but also the workload and responsibilities.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Supervisor Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Supervisor Woodman spoke to what I was going to say. If you're eliminating 2 or 3 other positions and you're going to ask somebody to take on additional duties, you basically give that person, you have to give that person a pay raise. So that's what I was going to say. So thank you, Supervisor Woodman.
Supervisor Boswick.
Just a little housekeeping. I heard from somebody who's watching at home, and they're saying it's really hard to hear whoever's speaking at the podium. Is that mic on? And if it is, could it be turned up a bit, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Schwartz.
Be closer.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Real quickly, I know there seems to be a lot of restructuring going on. Will there be a new organization chart sort of put out to sort of see how this organization is going to be structured at the end? If we're shifting things and adding layers of supervision over supervision, just to confirm and actually see what is actually going on. Clearly, my experience, flatter organizations work better, but that doesn't mean that you don't need it. I'm just trying to understand what is it going to be looking like at the end?
Sure, we can certainly modify our org chart to show these changes. They may sound more substantial than they are. in terms of the reclassification adds a lead supervisor to help support, but it's in one area. It isn't necessarily organizationally creating a whole layer. But we'd be happy to rework an org chart for a visual that shows where these positions show up in relation to each other.
Supervisor Peer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious if a lot of this can happen because of the maturity of the staff that you have. They can take on more responsibility and so on. But as we know, a lot of county employees are having a little bit of a problem competing with the general public as far as wages and positions and things like that. Are you concerned in the future that you'll be able to continue, you know, more or less doubling up or whatever you want to call it, whatever ratio you want, when you're combining positions and creating a new one, sort of thing?
Sure. I think the changes that we're proposing to make are smart, and they make us stronger and more efficient. I think our staff, I know our staff are exceptional, our workers, our supervisors in CPS across the board, and very committed. You know, you don't go into this work for the money or the recognition, and particularly those who are choosing to do work in Child Protective Services have just a lot of challenges and are just exceptional. And they have gotten statewide recognition. We've gotten national recognition for a lot of the innovative work that they're doing. And so I think that we have staff who, you know, are committed. Keeping staff here is about not just the competitive wages that I know is a priority for this board, but also in big ways, paying attention to the organizational culture and workforce well-being, and all of the things that go into making somewhere a good place to work. Those are priorities for us as well. A part of that is maintaining the proper ratios. And Child Protective Services, the data on turnover shows that one of the primary, pay does matter, but not as much as a few other things. The other two things that matter more than that are relationship with a supervisor and adequate supervision, because it's very challenging work and you don't want to feel alone in it, and organizational culture and climate in general. So we're working on all of that to try to orchestrate an environment that supports staff and keeps them here and attracts others when we need them.
I suspect leadership does that as well. Good leadership, people follow people that are developing that culture you're talking about.
Yep, leadership matters for sure.
Thank you.
All right, looks like we have a pause in questions for the moment. So, Kate, there will probably be more questions for you before you're done, but maybe feel free to take a seat if you like, or stand at the podium for the next couple of hours until we're through maybe the Human Services section. I was going to highlight a couple other things, and again, Kate can provide more on this, but there's just three other specific children, youth, and families position-related changes that we have in the budget here. One is related to the YSC. This is largely, I think Supervisor Bostwick used the term housekeeping. This is sort of housekeeping. When we did the wage study with McGrath, there were some clarifications that they thought were necessary with regard to you know, lead specialists versus supervisor positions. So we're deleting 3 of one, creating 3 of the other to clarify roles for supervision. And there's also some relief in part-time supervisor positions we're deleting. Overall, will save us some money on the sort of supervision approach at the YSC. At the very bottom of page 29, there's another position that's noted, the school-based diversion role in youth justice. That position is requested to be deleted. This would be an example of something that was you know, partially based on caseload trends, partially then, you know, this was kind of the analysis that I described earlier about, you know, what would be a position that not ideal necessarily to delete, but that based on sort of that marginal benefit recommended to be deleted. And this would be a position, I think, in a different category, and Kate, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that is currently vacant. So on a listing of positions that we would show would be vacant, but during the discussions about whether or not to make this change, did have somebody in it, and so they chose to leave during that interim time period. And finally, if you flip the page, top page 30, just again, this is again, Children's Long-Term Support Program, just again, kind of with the increase in caseload, and you remember that I talked about the increasing funding we're getting to serve clients where we just need certain staff to deal with more complex children with more complex needs, and so that's going to be federally funded. So I'm going to pause there for the CYF and see if there's any further questions for me or for Kate before we move on to behavioral health.
Seeing none.
All right, we'll keep moving then. So behavioral health, again, you can see the program areas that comprise behavioral health there at the top of the list. CCS, Comprehensive Community Services, this is one we've talked about before, again, largely federally funded through the Medicaid program. I won't go into details here, but you can see there's a little bit of levy in that program, similar to the prior year. And overall, if we jump down to expenditures, you remember the,
Supervisor Shields.
Where are you?
behavioral health programs, sorry. So page 30, start at page 30 in the next section. On your, on your separate human services admin comments handout.
That's not what mine says.
Do we have that? I'm not sure if we've, do we have the right comments handed out to you?
Yeah. Everyone on page 30? Hey, Josh, go ahead.
Supervisor Fugasath, can you find where that, you've got it? Great, thank you. Okay, thanks for asking for that clarification. So if we drop down to page 31, again, this is starts to speak to what you see on page 32 about that graph that I showed you in the presentation on Thursday. Overall, not as good of news for out-of-home placements for adults. So you can see, again, at the bullet points on the top of page 31 that our budgeted out-of-home placement costs for adults are going to increase by about $568,000. And overall, tax levy costs going up as well. So without going through the details, you have the different categories there of where those costs are going up and why. Much like on the children's side, if you have specific questions about behavioral health and the placements and the reasons and the sources and the uses, Kate's probably a better source for that. So before I go into personnel again, where we might have some more questions, does anybody have any questions they want to ask about out-of-home placements for adults?
Supervisor Schwartz.
Thanks, Chair. On these on the personnel positions, are these all unfilled today? Are any of these filled being eliminated? On page 32.
Page 30,
Two. Thanks.
32.
Yeah.
There is one position from that group that is currently filled. And I'm going to look at Sarah to correct me if I'm wrong about that.
There's one crisis position.
Right, one human services professional, one.
Professional one, okay. Thank you.
So then just to continue to cover the personnel changes, so that was, as you saw at the top of page 32, it's really about the outpatient clinic. And then just to quickly run through these, and again, you can ask questions if you have more. On page 33, just to note the homelessness prevention coordinator position. So this was an ARPA-funded position. ARPA funding is expiring for this position based on the resolution the board had passed previously. And so the strategy here is to maintain some of the services and the function that this position provided, but at a different level, so at a different lower level of position in the department. So you can see that as the description here is, that there is some third-party revenue coming in that could cover this based on putting this into crisis versus where it was in the organization before. But this would be transitioning that ARPA-funded position at a lower level to a county-funded position. I guess I'll just pause there. You can read what those other personnel changes are, and I would just ask if there's any questions, and Kate can probably answer them better than I can.
Seeing none.
I think Supervisor Fugo said that.
Supervisor Fugelsett.
The third-party revenues, how many are some? And let's see, the cost or the financing of those positions, how many years are that expected to go on?
So I'm trying to find the, that's professional one. In general, so the cost of a human services professional one position might be around $79,000. What we have in here is that the net cost would be around 67, so maybe looking at around $12,000 in third-party revenue that could cover a portion of those costs. That may not exactly be correct, but I think that's close. Maybe a little less depending on the level of the individual who's in that role. And then as far as how long that would continue to go on, the second part of your question, I think that's up to the board ultimately. If it's approved in the 25 budget, then year by year, I guess we'll see. As Kate said, they're reevaluating those things as they go on. This would be a new position at a different level, providing services that had been provided previously that were found valuable. But those are the kinds of things you evaluate from year to year when something's new. And so I'd imagine that the department will be looking at for 2026 and considering that again. Other personnel-related questions in behavioral health?
Not seeing any.
If not, we'll move on. Economic support, which is the top page 34. So just as a reminder, we have different kinds. If you look at the budget detail, you'd see there are different levels of, or different kind of buckets of revenue in economic support. One is for the work that we do directly for our own folks, and then there's the money that flows through the county for being the lead in the consortium. And so that, again, you can see those numbers are about equal, as our caseload is just about half of the total caseload of the consortium. Expenditures, again, you can see kind of where the expenditures are. There are some increases in expenditures for economic support programs. We do talk in here more about the caseload, which is not so much an expenditure per se, but something we do every year just to give you a sense of where the caseloads are. I referenced this in the graph you see on page 35 during the presentation. This just breaks out kind of some of the changes that comprise the reduction in 2024 year to date in that graph. As I mentioned, that's kind of due to the unwinding policy changes related to federal COVID policy. The personnel change that I'd highlight, that's about on page 35. This is another reclass for a couple of economic support specialist positions. Essentially what's happened here is we have a couple different classifications for economic support folks. We have a higher level to deal with our more complex cases. Through the unwinding process, as the caseload has now shifted, we see that there's more cases that are in the category of elderly, blind, disabled, the aging kind of cases. As the generally population changes, you'd expect there'd be more cases that are in this category. And so we need to move a couple of our positions to that higher level of complexity to manage those cases than we currently have. So that's what's behind the reclassification there. Any questions on economic support? If not, next up, if you flip to page 36, that's the Aging Disability Resource Center, Adult Protective Services, and our aging unit. So ADRC receives $2.1 million in funding in 2025, which is an increase which we get through time reporting to the state. So our staff there do a great job of tracking their time and bringing in more reimbursement. You can see here listed is how much we bring in for APS and elder neglect cases, which is going to be a decrease from the prior year. And then we talk about, in the revenue side, about the use of fund balance that we used in 2024 for the meal programs. There's a little bit remaining that we will use in 2025 to reduce the levy, and then there'll be no more fund balance remaining in that program. And then we note here as well about the transit program and how that is funded on the revenue side from state aid, some fund balance, and fees and contracts. On the expenditure side, just noting here again that we have the state, or the payment we have to make to the state for the family care program, which is ongoing. Again, a little bit more about referrals to adult protective services. Costs are going up by about 5.5% for that function. Specialized transit, we have our 12 minibuses, and there's a replacement schedule the department uses. In 2025, we're budgeting to replace 2 minibuses. One would be county only funded, one would be 20% of a state grant that we hope to get, so those funds are included in there. That would be funded with that fund balance I referenced earlier at the beginning of my comments that is from some economic support fund balance that's built up over time that can be used for anything really across the department or the county, and so that's the recommendation, is to use the fund balance for one-time costs so it doesn't be as much of an issue in future years for operational costs. We note here at the bottom of page 37 about the congregate and home-delivered meal programs. And you can see their cost increases are going up, but are similar to providers that we've had in the past. Overall, the congregate cost in the congregate program, which means the meal sites, are going down as those have not been used as much for the home-delivered program, going up as that continues to be popular following COVID. Also just note here the amounts that we contract with Beloit Meals on Wheels in Greene County for providing some meals as well. And finally, personnel, there's several personnel changes noted here. We have a position that's called the mobility coordinator right now. That position is recommended to be deleted. And you can see here what that position does. That had been partially grant funded. Over time, that grant funding is sort of declining, and so the recommendation is to eliminate that position. That is a position that is currently filled. Also, delete an administrative professional position that supports the ADRC, just department thinking it can get by with one position, and then a minor 0.15 nutrition site coordinator position that's vacant that we can manage with the current staff. Stop there and ask for any questions on ADRC and aging.
Supervisor Ficusette.
Thank you, Chair. Are both of the minibuses the same age?
The minibuses that would be replaced would be the oldest in the schedule to be replaced. I don't think we have the exact age of those at our fingertips, but we do have those. And that's part of the budget materials that the department provides, so we can certainly get that information to you and share the schedule with you.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions there, we'll move on to the Administrative Services Division. So if you look at the budget, this sometimes looks a little funny because the department charges out the costs for administrative services to the other divisions. So the full costs are really kind of borne and charged out to the other divisions for the services that administration provides. So not a whole lot to talk about with revenue expenditures, so I'll jump down to personnel. Which of course is the topic of interest. Here's what I had kind of referred to previously with administration. So one of the things that is being recommended is to delete the one FTE equity and engagement strategist. Again, this is another example of a position that is vacant now that we've just kind of taken a look at and budgetary pressures and making a recommendation on how we can save some money. One reason we're able to do this is because we have that second position in the county administrator's office that will be reallocating their time to support human services as well going forward, and we think that will work out fine to cover the needs. And so you can see the savings there, just over $100,000 for that change. If you go on page 39. I referenced this earlier about two positions in quality improvement. This is the other senior analyst and the supervisor position. These are also positions that are currently filled, and there's the explanation there that I gave you earlier about why that is being done and how we're going to cover those services. There's some changes, you go down the page in medical records. There's a deletion of one position of an administrative professional, one position. I think this might be an example of somebody who is thinking about retiring. So it's the question about retirements, and this is one of the examples here. But like other times we've talked about, to cover that position, we're asking to create a lead position to cover, as I described here in the comments, to try to cover some of the duties in a different way. So we think that we can get by with one less position if we kind of reallocate some of the duties in a different way. Also requested from the department is the reclassification of the business supervisor position. That is one of the requests that I'm not recommending. And then the other one is the reallocation of 2 application support specialist positions, and you can see the rationale for the request. I've also not requested or recommended that those 2 positions be modified in any way. So I'm going to finish out here. You can see the summary. I won't read through all of these, so you can see on the very last page what the expenditures and the levy is by each of the divisions. But overall, for the Human Services Department, the tax levy is expected to decrease by $230,000, big number, but only 1% of their levy, and just over 27 FTE would be deleted. Any final questions on either administrative services or the budget for human services overall?
Supervisor Schwartz.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple general questions, or I haven't seen anything in here regarding training expenses. Where are they heading for this department? I've seen it at every other one, but not this one. Where are training expenses heading here?
We work to decrease our overall departmental training resource. We looked for where we could trim without sacrificing that as a resource, and I don't know if I have that consolidated into an overall number, or if Sarah does, or if it's something we can get back to you.
No, yes, please, I'd like to get back. One of the reasons I'm asking is optically, if we're cutting positions, having high training dollars, especially if people are going out traveling to a lot of these, probably need to be looked at pretty hard. Just because, just optically, it's not good.
We agree with that, yes.
Yeah, we could follow up and get that to you.
I did have one other quick question. Still got the floor. Just out of curiosity, so this is just education for me, and maybe others, I'm not sure, but if these positions that are levy funded and if they're never filled, where does that money go? Does that just sit in a fund someplace until the positions are filled and then they're pushed off to human services?
So if your question is, if we budget for a position in 2024 and it's never filled, what happens to that funding? The answer is, for most departments, unless they're in their own sort of fund, like the airport or Rockhaven, then like in social human services, the example here, that money would fall back into the general fund. Okay. All things being equal. Sometimes if there are savings in a personnel line and there's a different need, that's when you might see a transfer come through committee, for a change here or there. But all else being equal, if that funding is if we're under budget at the end of the year, then that falls back to the general fund.
Great, thank you very much.
Any final human services related questions? Thanks, Kate. So we'll keep flipping backwards. The next is Health Services Committee. Health Services is the Rockhaven budget. So if you turn to what is page 10 in that section, you can see the comments on Rockhaven. The acknowledgement here is that we do have our ad hoc committee on the future of Rockhaven currently meeting. We're waiting right now on the report from Health Dimensions Group that I referenced in the presentation last week. I hope to have something more to tell you on that in the next couple of days as far as the timing goes on making that public. But as you can see here, and as I mentioned in the presentation on Thursday, the big change again this year is about the increase in Medicaid funding. So overall, in the budget, you can see here that at the bottom of page 10 that the rate, we'll call it the rate, is expected to increase up to $505 per day. It was $338 per day this year. Now, the caveat is on the next page that part of that is because we had a separate payment for our Medicaid losses from the Intergovernmental Transfer Program that was about $1.4 million in 2024 that is now being folded in by the state into that rate. So part of that rate is inflated because we now have a separate payment that was included in that. So that's not all just entirely new money from the feds. But overall, we're getting a significant increase, about that 42.8% increase in the Medicaid rate, which allows us to reduce the levy support, as I've mentioned to you several times now. Medicare is staying pretty similarly. The rate is going down, so we lose some money there, but we only have 8 budgeted Medicare residents on any one day, so there's less of an impact than there is for Medicaid. Also of note is the private pay rate is recommended to increase. I should say requested and recommended to increase. These are for people who are paying for their own care, up to $385 per day. It's currently at $340 per day. We're just in a little bit of a strange place with regard to the private pay rate, which historically has been, not that many years ago was 2 to 3 times what the Medicaid reimbursement rate was, and now Medicaid pays more than private pay does. So part of the intent here is to kind of help narrow the gap there a little bit between those two things. But you can see here that overall, because private pay was actually higher in 2024, that we expect to not really see much of a change in 2025. So you can see the budgeted census. We're budgeting for a census of 90. You may remember we have a 128-bed facility. We're currently holding one of those wings entirely vacant right now because of staffing issues. So that leaves us 96 beds that we're actively filling. And based on our sort of trends here, we can really only average about 90 of those filled at any one time as residents leave, and it takes a little bit of time to fill those. So that's why you see the 74 budgeted, which is 6 less than the prior year. I already mentioned the Intergovernmental Transfer Program. And so it's important to note, I mentioned also that Rock Haven has its own fund balance. So currently, Rock Haven's unrestricted net position is over $6 million as of the end of December 31, 2023. The expenditures, we don't staff the vacant wing, so you can see that's why staffing costs have been lower the last several years. We are increasing the amount towards agency staff. So you can see here we're more than doubling what we budgeted in 2024 for agency staff to be a little more realistic about what we can expect every year. We think we're going to tackle that problem, and we just haven't been able to. So the department's requested that we increase that to be more on trend. We also, overtime, we have about $1.1 million in overtime every year as well. There's a few capital purchases that you can see here listed here. These are depreciated in the Rock Haven budget, similar to what we just talked about in the Public Works budget that's required to be done sort of under the way we incorporate into capturing some of that in our Medicaid rates. So no personnel requests. Overall, the levy for Rock Haven is just about $2.5 million, which is a $1.5 million decrease from the prior year. Questions about Rock Haven?
Supervisor Holman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for you, Josh. You made comment that the funding for Rock Haven and airport is by and large its own entity, and taking money from Rock Haven and moving it over to the highway department. I understand your dilemma, but I also understand the dilemma of one wing being closed and hiring out for contract employees, which is far more expensive than internal employees. Why did we not consider more of that revenue being shared to another department, stayed within house, and then possibly get that wing opened up, and also correcting some of the wage indifferences that are always the gripe?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the long-term strategy around that, we'll see that more and talk about that more when we get the Health Dimensions Group report. They'll have some recommendations in there about things for the board to think about with regard to accomplishing what you just noted about getting that. How do we get that wing open, and how could we get that wing open in a way that continues to not increase the costs to the county. And so I would stick a pin in that part of that question right now, because we'll talk about that again soon when we see that report. As far as moving the money around, there's a couple reasons for that. Number one is that if you think about the $4 million that we have in 2024 in the Rockhaven budget that is tax levy, in the private sector, that's what you'd call losses, right? So the county tax levy is subsidizing Rockhaven. And so to the extent that we can reduce our losses, then that is a good thing. And that's what's happened with the increase in the Medicaid rates, reducing the losses. If we don't, and this is kind of the bigger picture issue with Rockhaven that we've been trying to focus on over the past several years, is that, as a service, the county board has, I think, pretty consistently overall wanted to continue to provide to the community. It's the challenge of that being, a non-mandated service, where we do have mandated services, whether it's human services or obviously we want to plow the roads. So if we can get savings in Rockhaven, that allows us to meet our other obligations that we have to under state law. So, for example, if we were to say that, and the board could decide this. Honestly, you could decide this. Let's just say that you said, let's take that $1.5 million and plow it back into staff wages, which would be a great thing to do, could address some of our Rockhaven needs. Then we're going to have to cut $1.5 million from the highway budget, because there's only so much county share or tax levy available every year. And so, that's kind of the trade-off there. Or you could say, well, we want to keep that in the highway budget. Well, then we have to find $1.5 million somewhere else to cut in the county budget to kind of do that. So those are the trade-offs that are in the recommended budget and that you're going to all have to wrestle with soon.
Okay, thank you. I understand what you're describing, but I wasn't talking about the entirety of, that 40% that you were indicating. I'm not advocating, because I wouldn't want to be in your position trying to figure out how to balance that bowl, but I'm just saying, is there an offset somewhere that's manageable, that can lever some benefit to both sides of what you're trying to do? That's what I'm looking at, because you made a mention that, yeah, we're not obligated to have our nursing facility out there mandated, I think was the word. But what I see is what we take and do with our seniors says everything about us as a society. And I've said this before in other board meetings over the last how many years being here, that what we do with our seniors says everything about us. And I've got enough trouble I'm going to have to talk about upstairs someday, so I don't want to have to add to that fire. So my question is, how do we get better? And I know that's going to be just like the catch-22 question to you, and I don't know how to go about that because I don't have to live in your world, but I'm just asking, is there a way that we can work something in it? I don't know how to write that if I was going to write it. And my question is to you, how do we proceed forward for best benefit for all parties in place? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think the wage question is really not different than the question or the discussion we had around public works. How do we allocate funding to Rockhaven staff to be more competitive in the market, recruit and retain staff, be able to open that wing because we have more staff. We can, it's an unanswerable question right now today, because it's very similar, right? How do we get more resources for that? I think again, I'll just refer back to the Health Dimensions Group report that's coming. What we asked them to do was a financial, operational, and staffing analysis to address the long-term, fiscal sustainability and stability of Rockhaven. And so the goal was in that to address exactly the questions that you're asking. How do we in the long term continue to provide this service in a way that will not only keep Rockhaven operational and thriving, but save the county money, maybe over the long term and being able to fund the other things we need to do. So I would just, again, reiterate that, maybe the next, next week or so, we'll start those conversations.
Supervisor Cullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Josh, how many counties have a nursing home like Rockhaven still in Wisconsin?
Yeah, it's a decreasing number. I would say at the most maybe in the teens. But yeah, it's not, you know, there's been several that have been closed in the past several years, and Sauk County just voted a couple weeks ago to sell theirs. So a decreasing number, and for all the reasons we've talked about. I think the good news for us is that the Medicaid rates are increasing, which is the primary reason for losses at nursing homes. And so to the extent that that has gone up, that has given us some breathing room that others haven't had.
Overall, all in with Medicare reimbursement, what the county puts in, what's our total budget for Rock Haven?
Yeah, the total budget, so, you know, you can find this if you were to flip to the financial summary page in the book, so this is a good opportunity to do that. So if you were to look there, you'd see our total budget, all expenditures, $19 million. And then of that, though, tax levy is only 2.5.
Thank you.
Supervisor Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Josh, you said we would be getting some kind of a report on Rock Haven, and that would include some kind of an idea of what to do with that wing, some suggestions on what to do with that wing. So my comment is, I hope we're not planning on robbing Peter to pay Paul. I really feel like we need to get out of that habit of where do we take money from here to pay here? Because that's it kind of feels like we're managing our home budget. Taking money from here to pay money over here, and we all know that's just really not a good idea.
Yeah.
So I hope that when we see that, that's not in the plan.
Yeah, I think what you'll see is some suggestions from the consultants about, again, kind of that long-term fiscal stability and some things we can do to open the wing and, you know, increase revenue, but some things we have to do on the operational side to accommodate that. And I think there will be a lot of discussion on the board about, you know, whether they agree with some of those or disagree with some of those, but it's a starting point, you know, for a discussion.
Supervisor Figo, sir.
Others on the board, the Rock Haven can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not a simple situation. I'm really looking forward to seeing that report. Part of the problem is the beds on the empty wing are licensed, and we have to be able to somehow decide, are we going to keep those licenses or give them up because we are paying for them? Another giant hit to our budget is, I believe it's about $90,000 a month we're paying in nursing staff agency, RNs, LPNs. So the beds that we're filling, which is about, 89, 90 is our capacity, even with the nurses we have hired, we can't staff with that amount without hiring agency nursing.
That is correct.
Thank you. And before we go to the next department, we've been here a couple hours now, so I just want to entertain, and we don't have to do it if anyone needs to take a quick 5-minute break, or do we keep plugging along? I'm looking for keep plugging? All right, keep on going. I just wanted to make sure we offer that, so.
Okay, if there's nothing else in Rock Haven and Health Services Committee, we'll go back to flip again back to General Services Committee. So here's where the facilities management budget is. So on page 7 of that section is where we have the comments. One thing I would note on the revenue side is that there is $200,000 that's included in the general services budget for inmate and public telephone charges at the jail. So these are things, again, it's kind of facility related that comes in. This is something to keep your eye on in next year and in future years. There's been some litigation about charges to inmates for phone service that nothing has changed right now, but I would guess that in the future this is a resource we're not going to have available at this level based on kind of some of the court cases that are proceeding. Expenditures, you can see, here we try to talk about the costs, various electricity and utilities costs at the various facilities. One thing to note that's a big increase next year is about our cleaning of the jail is going to go up pretty significantly just because of the cleanable space is increasing in that new facility once we kind of fully open that up. We've already kind of built in some of the utility increases there in the 24 budget, so those won't go up as much next year. Overall, utilities are seeing a decrease in the recommended budget based on just some historical trends. That's just a dicey game to try to prognosticate on utilities and what's going to happen in the markets, but that's where we ended up. I would note at the bottom of page 7 that the effort to sell the healthcare center building, That is continuing. That's been discussed at General Services Committee in the past few meetings. And we did just want to note here that the cost in 2025, just to maintain that building as it is about $223,000. So just for utilities and very minor maintenance kind of costs, keep the fire alarm system up and running. So keep that in mind as a cost as we proceed through that process. Overall, I would jump down to the capital projects on page 8. So here's kind of a couple things that I mentioned earlier. At the bottom of page 8, you remember in the presentation I had mentioned that some funding was going to be reallocated to other, from 2024 to other projects in 2025. And here I list the 3 things, the 4 things actually are listed there. The biggest is that Public Works Parks building that we weren't able to procure in 2024, so that funding is coming back. I will note that the Rockhaven project is no longer being included here, so that amount of money actually was not included in the budget that you have in front of you. If we just down and look at the expenditures then for the capital projects, overall, in these projects, they're listed in here, sales tax funds $616,000. That's a number that you would have seen in the presentation as well. So here, is kind of a juncture where, as you think about how you use sales tax, this is a number that would be much lower than what you've seen in prior years. And so if you think about trying to reallocate sales tax to other functions, those would have to come from certain projects. And so just thinking about $616,000 and how far that would get you. For example, if you wanted to reduce the tax increase for debt service, which is $1.5 million, you'd have to backfill that with sales tax. And so as we go through here, you can be looking for those sales tax funded projects and think about whether there's any that you would want to reduce to be able to reduce that debt service levy and reduce taxes overall. So fewer things here than in prior years, as I said. You can see the list on page 9 of the different kind of projects. A couple I'll just point out that the purchase of the skid steer at the DWRC for $20,000. That would be facilities management purchasing that from the highway shop. So really that's just money that's going in one pocket and out of another. DPW just doesn't need that one anymore, and so they're going to try to sell that to facilities. They've been letting facilities use it, kind of leasing it a little bit, I guess, this year, but we really need to finalize that transaction. So that one is worth noting. I think the other ones that you see listed here are really very much just maintenance projects. I won't go through the details on any of those, but I did want to go down to page 11 at the bottom there. And you can see here just highlighting 4 projects that I haven't recommended to be funded. Again, these were projects that in other years might be included in the list of things that we would do, and some of them certainly are definitely maintenance kinds of projects, such as the overhead door replacements at Public Works or plumbing upgrades at the fairgrounds. But you can see that a couple of them there, stormwater management plan, we've designed that, but don't have the money to implement that in 25, as well as the funding. We do have $450,000 in the 24 budget that you all included for the garage, facilities garage out DWRC. That's coming over budget, and so we would need another $250,000 to complete that project, but I've not recommended that. So the $450,000 remains in the budget, but there isn't sufficient funding right now to complete that project. So I'll pause there for questions about general services. And again, I would refer you back to this handout here that talks about not just in general services, but overall the capital projects that are and are not recommended and their funding sources. Any questions about general services? If not, we'll move to Finance Committee. So if you continue to leaf backwards, the next yellow divider section is about finance. The Finance Department is the first section, so on page 5, begin the comments. So again, mostly here, just kind of cost to continue stuff in the operational budget. One thing I would point out, as we have budgeted $17,280 for some consulting for our finance system to try to figure out how we can maybe improve our efficiencies in the utilization of our finance software application. Other than that, a couple changes related to the implementation of Dayforce, which is our HR payroll system. One of which is that we are allocating fewer charges to other departments for payroll services as it's become a little more efficient and we don't need as many staff to do that function, which results in the personnel changes as well related to Dayforce that have a savings of almost $19,000, where we're reducing an administrative professional from 1.0 to half-time, as well as deleting a 0.4 payroll specialist and then increasing another payroll specialist to full-time at the costs you see there. So overall savings from those changes, which are again largely driven by changes to Dayforce. So overall, Finance Department's tax levy, 6% increase of that $72,000 figure that you see there. Any questions about finance? If not, we'll move on to information technology. So information technology is another one of the examples of departments that doesn't have a whole lot of initiatives for 25 because of a strategy that they employed back in May when we talked about what we wanted to do to try to accomplish the direction from the staff and finance committees. So essentially what IT did is they looked at their 2024 projects. Really, one of the things that I asked all departments to do really was think about the 2025 budget as an 18-month budget versus a 12-month budget beginning in July of 2024. What hasn't been spent for the remainder of 2024 that we can reprioritize for 2025. And what they've done is they've done that essentially. So there's a bunch of projects here that aren't really things that you are being asked to approve in the 25 budget, but for transparency to see how they have done that, we included that information here. So you'll see both projects that they have decided not to move forward with in 2024, as well as a list of projects that they reprioritize that money to. So for example, if you look on page 17, under the header, the bullet there, you see the first one is something that came to your county board meeting on Thursday. So you've already begun to see this. So projects that they're reallocating funding for, a lot of them are going to come to you for approval at some point here, whether it's in 24, they carry those funds over to 25. So for example, the second bullet there, the laptop and computer replacement. For the last several years, we've used $300,000, $400,000 for equipment as part of our replacement cycle, depending on how many pieces are in the yearly replacement cycle. So what they've done is they've taken 125 of that replacement monies in 24 and reallocated that to equipment that in 2025 would no longer be able to run Windows 11, replace that, prioritize the replacement of that, and then not replace the normal laptops that we would, and just take some risk that those will continue to function and that we have some in the inventory from used that people have turned in over time that we've kept that we would redeploy if something breaks. So those are just a couple examples of the strategy that IT is employing for the 2024 and 2025 budgets. I'll jump down into personnel, a couple things. One of their major priorities in 2025 is to create a focused cybersecurity unit. One of the things in the operational budget that I'm not recommending just because of other priorities is a cybersecurity intern that they had wanted in the amount of $31,000. So I'm not recommending that. But there are several things related to their reorganization that I am requesting. Overall, the changes in the cybersecurity unit result in a small net savings of just under $5,000. So if you look on the bottom of page 19, we're deleting an information security program officer and creating a cybersecurity supervisor at one pay grade higher in order to supervise the unit. That prior position didn't have any supervisory responsibilities. Then we're deleting one position, a desk side support position, and creating a cybersecurity analyst, so redeploying a current position to a higher priority need. We're also changing the title of another position you can see further down here, that is, so we'd have two cybersecurity analyst positions in the new unit. So a position that's a network engineer right now that has already started to do some of this work, but that we would formally change the title and redeploy them to that new unit. So that's the new focus on the cybersecurity unit that you'd see. There were two additional personnel changes. One was a reallocation for the public safety system supervisor, which I think is warranted and I'm recommending, and then one reclassification of a network engineer, which I just have not prioritized and not recommended. So overall, tax levy for Rock IT, increase of just $12,000 or just 0.3% compared to the prior year. Any questions about the IT budget?
Supervisor Schwartz.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I noticed that obviously there's a lot of focus around cybersecurity, which there should be, so I'm all for it. I was just curious, though, I've noticed my short time on the board is that different departments get a much different ability to pull information. So do we have a data warehouse at the county level, or is it each department creating its own little data centers and then using Power BI or whatever, Tableau or whatever they're putting over the top of it to be able to have better access to information? Is there a strategy here, or do we have one and it's just not all areas have the expertise to manage it?
Yeah, so I'll start. And then if there's anything, Jim, that you want to add, feel free to come up and add to it. So in general, we do not have a data warehouse in the way that you would think about, the place where all county data kind of goes together and there's access to it across the organization. So it is much more that, each function kind of has its software system. In human services, they have their own system that is obviously pretty significant. And, across the departments, there are different functions. And part of that is driven by, the sort of the state mandated functions they have to provide. A lot of it is state systems, like in child support. We have a state mandated system that we use. So we use the state system. In human services, of course, there's state systems and data, but we use our own system to, track data here locally and manage it. So it's not, it is certainly not countywide in that way. Which is just about, if we're just talking about like data management versus data storage, those are two different things, right? If we're talking about data management, which is what I'm addressing, then that's kind of how it has functioned. You're exactly right. Like some of our strategies in the coming year are really to increase our use of things like Power BI to be able to increase the functionality of our utilization of that data. And so like the example in human services was, we had some quality improvement positions that were, we've had for several years that were intended to do a purpose, like that, like use data to figure out how to improve. And what we've kind of come to the conclusion that we think we can do a better job by using our analyst positions that remain in a different way by, for example, using Power BI. And so that is the current strategy, but there is not, there is not, the resources have not been prioritized to create some sort of more like Uber data function in the way that you describe, which would be great. Challenging, but would be good. But we're not there. Anything else on IT? All right, move on to the county clerk. So you can see overall on page 30, revenue in various areas the county clerk gets in her budget is down for a variety of reasons, including sort of like passport-related fees, related travel, and elections, as there are fewer elections in 2025 compared to 2024, which is the highest of the cycle. So really those are what's driving the clerk's budget overall. And so just getting to the summary, you can see that the main account, the clerk's main account is increasing the tax levy. Again, those are, again, related to some of the revenue discussions. And then the elections account is decreasing by a larger amount because of the election cycle. So overall, the county clerk's tax levy is decreasing by just under $5,000. Any questions that you want to ask? I'm sure Lisa can answer them for you. If none, the treasurer's budget is next. You can see the sources of revenue in the treasurer's budget. Where we do book a lot of our revenue in the treasurer's budget. You can see in the various categories here. Worth noting is significantly the interest on investments that we book here, and that which can vary significantly depending on the economy and what interest rates are. So you can see in 2025, we expect that our interest on investments is going to increase by $2 million. I referenced that when we talk about public works and funding available to fund things in public works because of this. But this is not a permanent funding source. It will change from year to year based on what this will be. So as a comparison, in recent years, we have budgeted less to be more conservative. And then, for example, we budget $2 million in 2024. We see $4 million in revenue. That funding then falls to the general fund. So that's one reason sometimes that you see increases in the general fund is because of things like that. Overall, there are some changes in how we sell tax delinquent properties, which I won't get into. It's more of a legal issue than a budget issue, but does affect the budget. So overall, that $2 million increase in interest on investments is driving the overall increase in the revenue in the treasurer's budget, which is available then to fund other parts of the operation. Anything else for the treasurer? Register of Deeds is next. Like the treasurer's budget, the Register of Deeds brings in money that funds other parts of the operation. You can see on page 44 the description of the major drivers of that, the real estate transfer fee and the real estate registry fee, and how those come in. The increase in both, I'm being a little more optimistic on the real estate transfer fee and anticipating that'll go up by $30,000 in next year. Overall, again, I think this is another example where the department has taken an approach of trying to reduce where they can some of their operational line items, even if not significantly, but certainly made the effort to try to do that. And so overall, the recommended budget contains just over $500,000 more in revenue than expenditures, which is $67,000 more than in 2024. And so that goes to offset other costs. Questions about the Register of Deeds budget? I see Sandy is here if you have any questions. If not, then we'll move away from the departments to some of our countywide accounts. Community Agency Initiatives is next. This is the account that funds the, for lack of a better word, contributions to nonprofit agencies. We're only allowed to provide funding to those departments or those agencies that statutorily we're required to, unless we have a contract with them. So overall, what you see happening here is the end of the ARPA funding that was included here. So, you can see through here, we have a contract with HealthNet, which is the same as the prior year. RSVP, they've requested a couple $1,000s more than I've recommended. The YWCA has requested $25,000 for the care house. There's $10,000 in tax levy that was provided historically there, and so I'm recommending that $10,000. In the big picture, I'll note here what the requests are. If the requests were higher than the tax levy they got in 2024, I've not recommended it. So at the bottom line, everybody I'm recommending get the same amount of tax levy they got in 2024. No ARPA, but the tax levy that they got in 2024. So you can see several places where agencies requested more. I mentioned the YWCA for the care house, also YWCA for the domestic violence shelter. They requested a little bit more, as well as for the child care program, which was previously just ARPA funded. So there's no recommendation of any funds for child care for the YWCA in 2025's budget. Family Services also requesting a little bit more for their shelter than I'm recommending. And then as well as for their sexual assault recovery program. CASA has requested and recommended the same amount, Heritage Rock County the same amount as the prior year, as well as the Tourism Council. I would note that the 4-H Fair Board has requested $20,000 to do some maintenance out at the fairgrounds, but I've not recommended that. As you recall, I didn't recommend the $70-some thousand in the general services budget for a similar purpose. So overall, that's community agency initiatives. Questions about those contributions?
Supervisor Fugelseth.
Thank you, Chair. I understand ARPA was a special situation, and I would like to see, I believe there's 11 programs and 8 nonprofit agencies.
Yes, that sounds right.
All right, so is it possible to get an accounting of all the 8 nonprofits broken down into program as to how much they've received from the county board over the last 10 years?
10 years, yep, we could do that. We used a similar chart that over the years for the staff committee when we take this to them at their last meeting. So we have that, we'll put that together for you.
Thank you.
Supervisor Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With these nonprofits specifically, do we know approximately what percentage of their budget the contributions we are giving? I mean, some of these numbers aren't really large, so I can't imagine they're large percentages to their budget.
We do have some information. They do submit some information when they make their requests, but I don't know that universally we would know what their budgets are to be able to answer that question. Some of it we probably can, but I probably not for across all of them, I would say.
Okay, thank you. But my other thing is, one of the, as we're talking about cutting employees, I'm stepping back and saying, what is this, how does this feel, giving the money, even though it's not a massive amount of money, out while we're cutting back on employees or we're having wage issues? I'm sort of looking at long haul, does this make sense for us to be doing this in these next few years where we know we have tight budget?
And I think that's it's a recurring issue over the years in the county budget about whether or not this is the highest and best use of funds and what the impact would be for not doing it. So yeah, I'd expect that to be a discussion.
Supervisor Belkey.
Thank you, Chair. Do you get information, I'm losing my voice and I haven't even spoke that much, from them showing what they do with the money?
Yeah, so they submit information when they make the request that kind of explains more about, more than I have here, about kind of what they do with the money, who they serve. Some provide, statistics on here's how many we've served in the prior year, and so forth. So there is more information about what they do with these funds.
Supervisor Gorman.
Sorry, I might not, well, wasn't prepared to have a voice at all after being quiet for so long. I just want to speak up. I've been part of the Community Development Authority in Beloit for the last 5 years that's funded a lot of these same nonprofits on a similar scale. And I just want to speak to the benefit of the county in that we as a county could not run a $10,000 transitional living facility or a $10,000 sexual assault recovery program. But as one of many entities in the county and the state and the feds that fund these entities, we get to live in a county that has these programs and has them delivered. And I think we do a much better job being a contributing small part of these programs and having them exist than trying to run our own $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 versions of these programs that would not be effective. So just had to speak up for my nonprofits.
Next is health insurance. I'm not going to go through all the details of the health insurance at this point, other than to kind of note that the things I highlighted before, if you were to kind of flip to the back of that section on page 53, that our cost for health insurance in 2025 is going to be over $30 million. There's over a $3 million increase for that in 2025. And so I would encourage you to review this section and read it as the ad hoc committee continues to do its work. So by next April, as the ad hoc committee makes its recommendations for the 2026 health insurance program, just having this as a reference point, I think would be useful for all of us to have and remember where it is and read it and look at it, because those aren't necessarily changes that we're going to be able to influence in 2025 budget, but 2026 is the target now for that. So I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody has on health insurance, but just wanted to highlight those few things.
Supervisor Fugelseth.
Thank you, Chair. When contracting with Mercy Health and Dean Health Plan, are price transparency built into the contracts at all?
Well, they're probably not any more or less than any other providers provide any other, organizations that contract with them.
Supervisor Towns.
Josh, do you have just a ballpark idea? It doesn't, this summary is just a little bit different than the others because you don't refer to the tax levy in it. And I know in 2025, we used $4 million from the insurance trust fund. But do you have an idea how much of that $30 million falls on the levy?
Yeah, so the best place to kind of think about that was the, we had a chart in the presentation of health insurance funding sources. And so the 85% of that, $30 million cost is funded by charges to departments. And some of those, like in the Human Services Department, can be charged to federal grants, right? Because federal grant will pay for a portion of the personnel, right? As part of that's their health insurance costs. But, largely, that 85% is going to be, county share levy. And it's hard to know exactly what it is because when you charge the departmental budget, it kind of gets mixed up in all the other costs, and we don't really know exactly at this level, like for human services, for example, how much of that is levy or not at this minutia level. But that'd be the easiest way to think about it.
Well, I saw you, and you mentioned that in your writing that this, but even if the departments aren't really a resource because that is funded by levy or grants or stuff too, so.
Correct, yep.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
do you think the majority of that 85% is levy? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I would say the majority is levy.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we'll move on. Employee recognition, I won't spend a whole lot of time here, just that it's largely the same as the prior year. We included a little more money to try to, as Kate had mentioned when she was up here about culture and trying to make this a place where people want to come and stay, which is more than just about wages. Employee wellness, kind of the same thing. I would put more into wellness. Last year, continue that same amount in the following year to try to continue our efforts there. But I'll pause recognition and wellness. Does anybody have any questions on those two programs? If not, opioid settlement is next. Nothing new there. Similar things that you've seen in the plan that you've approved as far as what we're using those funds for. So no differences in what you've already seen. No new initiatives for 2025, just the same as the prior year. So overall, about $446,000 of those opioid settlement funds budgeted for the initiatives you see here. Any questions on the opioid settlement account? And then finally, I guess not finally, next to last in the finance section here is ARPA. So the point here to make is that there are several positions that are still funded by ARPA, as well as several projects that are still funded by ARPA. But all, as you know, all the ARPA funding has been allocated. So no new initiatives for ARPA in 2025. It's just a continuation of the projects that were previously approved, which is a total of just over $757,000. Will remain in the 2025 budget that's already been approved by the board. Any questions on ARPA? Finally, broadband. Just to summarize broadband, if you go to page 67, you can see the expenditures. There's several sources that we have some money for broadband planning. Also have some repayments from Fond du Lac County from the bonding that we've done that will be set aside to be used for further broadband expansion efforts. We have a little bit of a planning grant left, and that we don't yet see any of the repayments beginning from the ARPA loan to Bug Tussle until 2026. So those are just highlights of kind of what our ongoing broadband funding in the budget is going to be, but no tax levy included there. Any broadband questions? I'm going to make Randy come up to the front if you have broadband questions. All right, keep moving backwards then. Veterans, the Education Veterans Committee. So that's just the Veteran Service Office. So if you flip to that section, and you can look on page 6, not a whole lot new to report here. State aid remains at the level it is. We have a transfer in a larger amount. There's a couple different fund balances that Veteran Service Office keeps. One is a sort of county-initiated fund balance that's been sort of money we set aside for things like groceries and gas over the years, that when that is unspent, it falls to their fund balance for reappropriation. Another is donations they get from the community. That's has accumulated over the years. So what the department's requesting is sort of setting aside $20,000 from that veterans donation account to just be able to access during the year in case there's needs from veterans. And if that is unspent during the year, then that just falls back to the fund balance for future years. But the idea is to give a little more flexibility and the department being able to provide some of these services to veterans over the course of the year. The big change really in the department's budget is the increase in the lease, which is increasing $14,400, just as we kind of have that first full year of services under our belt to kind of see what that'll be going forward. So that's the increase in the lease cost. You can see here some of the things that has done, as Supervisor Schneider mentioned at our last meeting, some of the different services that that location is able to provide, which we aren't paying for, and in some cases are providing us with some minor lease revenue. So some of the benefit there of the new facility. The one personnel change is there's a request to reclassify a Veterans Benefit Specialist to an Assistant County Veterans Service Officer at a cost of just over $6,700 for the reasons that you note here. And I just have not recommended that at this time. So overall, about a 7% increase in the levy for the Veterans Service Office. Any questions?
Supervisor Holman.
Thank you again, Chair. You were talking that unspent money be just going right back to the budget, the general fund, if you will. With the veterans, their fund is always going to be a little up and down anyways. Would we be better off taking that money that was appropriated for them and just keeping it earmarked for that that specific service of veterans and leave it there as, unspent money? Yes. Next time around, they might need that.
Yep.
Instead of having to come to the well again looking for more.
Yeah, so it's a good question to clarify. So because they do keep their own fund balance, so it doesn't go back to the general fund, so to speak. So like it does, they get donations like from the patriotic concert, they'll get some proceeds and they'll go into this donation account. And that is only and remains for veterans. And so if we, this $20,000 that is going to be in the 2025 recommended budget is available for, specific purposes to help veterans if they need it. And my point was simply that if they don't use all that $20,000, then that will be used in a future year at some point for veterans that will, fall back to their own specific fund balance that every year we'll have this conversation about, how much does the board want to put into their budget for that year for helping veterans. But in no circumstance will that go to anything else other than supporting veterans' needs. We'll keep flipping backwards then. Flip one more back to County Board Staff Committee. We'll talk about the county administrator. Oh, sorry.
Supervisor Towns has a
Oh,
question.
sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had one quick question about the veterans thing. So the tax levy is gonna go up $35,000 almost. And is that primarily because they have to pay more rent?
The rent amount, increase in staff costs, you can see a little minor training increase there. So yeah, hodgepodge of things, but largely the biggest one is that would be the lease increase and staff cost increases would be the two bigger
So
ones.
moving them down there is gonna go on the levy, basically, right?
Yeah, right. The cost to move them down there, the lease costs, is an increase, is an increase in costs.
Thank you.
Supervisor Sutherland.
Thank you, Chair Levy. Josh, would you have an idea to tell the board what the increase of federal money that has come into the county since the PACT Act and the reason that we did this to begin with?
Yeah, so the department always provides to the committee an estimate every year of the amount of federal money coming in to the county for veteran services, not in the county budget, but through the VA and other things. And as Supervisor Sutherland mentions, the PACT Act that was approved in the last couple of years provides a new level of funding for veterans, for example, burn pits. And so there's new funding coming in for that. I don't have that with me, but certainly if there's an interest, we can easily share that out. We have that information, and it'd probably be interesting for the board to see. So we'll put that on the list to send out to everybody.
Thank you.
Supervisor Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to note that there definitely was an increase in the lease price, but shared with us at the last Veteran and Education meeting was the fact that correct me if I'm wrong, Supervisor Peer, $55 million were given to veterans in Rock County through that office. So I think that's a huge amount of support for them for a pretty minimal cost of a lease increase.
Yeah, those are the numbers we can make sure we verify and send out the exact numbers going forward. All right, now we can jump back to County Board Staff Committee and start with the County Administrator's budget. One thing to note in the budget highlights, So you may recall that in 2024 budget, the board set aside $50,000 in sales tax for one-time costs for contract to improve communications. That was an issue that we talked about several times throughout the development of the strategic plan. So what happened was back in May and June, we've done a little work on having some conversations about this, talked to some local folks about their communication operations. But then when we got the direction from the staff committee on what we may need to do going forward with regard to sales tax, we kind of paused that project, much like the parks position, we paused recruiting for that to see if this would be money that we would need to return for higher priority projects in 25. So as you can see here, I've not included it in the amount that we've returned. So it remains unspent in the county administrator's budget. All else being equal, what I would do is carry that money over and continue that project in 2025, but there won't be time to finish that now in 2024 since we did take that pause. So that money sits there. Certainly if somebody wants to reallocate that, they could choose to do so, but all else being equal, we would carry that money over and do that project next year. As you can just see in the expenditures there, overall, this is where we keep our equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging training funds for the one remaining equity engagement strategist to manage countywide. Overall, most of our department's budget is related to personnel. We do share that 25% person with the HR department. So we do give them a cost allocation for 25% of that time. We are decreasing the training budget. This is, as Supervisor Schwartz asked earlier, one area we could look at to try to decrease in our budget as well. So overall, the increase for levy is 2.1%, which is, again, personnel related. Are there any questions about the county administrator's office budget? If not, Corporation Council is next. Not a whole lot to report here either as far as change.
Josh, I'm sorry, Supervisor Figueroa.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at this, this caught my eye. So the $20,000 for training and related expenses, is that essentially the 18,000 increase?
No, the 20,000. Yeah, the 20,000's been in there for several years now, so that's not the related to the increase. That itself isn't changing from year to year.
What kind of education does that $20,000 buy?
Well, I mean, a variety of different things. It funds the different kinds of professional development and training sessions we do on our topics of equity. And so a variety of things is something that staff committees recently talked about in some detail as to how those funds are used. So it's a variety of different kinds of topics ranging from anything you could think of. Obviously, people, when they think of the ADIB, oftentimes they think about race, but it's also things related to intergenerational communications, Americans with Disabilities Act, anything that would be sort of inclusion related would be in that category. Again, communication, how to get along better with people. We're having a training session this week for our department heads that would be funded through this. That is about kind of like restorative practices that's intended to help supervisors and managers work better with their employees, in a way that is, kind of a restorative approach to positive communications with their staff. So a variety of different examples would be funded out of here.
The amount caught my eye because my understanding is many of these type of trainings are free from the DPI website and also through other third-party organizations.
Yeah, just like any other department, I suppose that there are free trainings that we do. I don't know that we use any through DPI, but there are other free trainings that we do use. Yeah. So this would not represent all the training that is offered to the county-wide wouldn't be funded out of here because, like you said, there are some things that we can take advantage of that are free.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Schwartz.
Thanks, Chair. Going back to the communications initiative, maybe I missed something when you were speaking, but what specifically is it that we're trying to accomplish with that?
Yeah. So the initiation behind that was that the county board generally was wanting to improve communication countywide. I think they'd identified that there sort of is a deficit in our communication to the public, as an example, that we could be doing a better job of getting information out about what we're doing, or just generally letting people know what's going on. And so, because we don't have a dedicated communications position like countywide, we have communications positions in human services and the health department, but nothing countywide. So it was intended sort of to, in lieu of, the board historically has not wanted to increase, positions for communications, but giving us some consulting work to help kind of create a baseline plan for how, with the resources we have, we can communicate better.
Out of curiosity, is there bandwidth in the human resources communication person to take on some of this?
So, Prince, human services is where the communications position, so human services, and I would say no, not, I think that position is filled with human services related communications, both internal, external. I think part of what the plan would be here would be that if somebody's going to come in and sort of evaluate our current communications infrastructure, they talk to those folks to try to evaluate that objectively and make some recommendations. So, I'd say sitting here right today, I don't think so, but, if we were to do a plan, maybe. So now move on to Corporation Council. Corporation Council has a lot of their costs that are charged back to child support and human services for attorney services they provide. So you can see here that that's a little over $900,000 that are charged to those departments. And again, the reason to do that is those departments can charge some of that to grants or other indirect costs. You can see your risk managers charge back to our workers' compensation fund. And you can see training here is not changed. Overall tax levy, 4% increase for Corporation Council, which again is probably largely related to staff costs. Questions about Corporation Council? If not, human resources, we'll jump there. That's on page 18. Again, not a whole lot in their operational budget to note here. A little bit of increase in publications up for a 5-year poster subscription for employment-related posters that is due. Training expense, again, is down a little bit here. Some of the chargebacks are down a little bit as well for the things they do. Personnel, the change here is that the department has offered up through their request, and I am recommending to delete the vacant position that the department was given in 2023. Some of you who were around at the time may remember following the Hugh Life report. It was determined that the department was significantly understaffed for an organization of our size compared to industry standards. And I know that sometimes you probably hear from departments that, gosh, I wish we could hire faster or we could do different things. And, this was one of the things that we were hoping to do with this position is kind of begin to incrementally increase the resources that would have the same kind of effect throughout the county. That's kind of, we talked about before with kind of culture and improvements countywide. But given the situation and there's a vacant position, as much as I didn't really want to, I did recommend that we delete that position because it is vacant and kind of go back to where we were before 2023. Questions for human resources budget? If not, Board of Health is next, and so we'll talk about Public Health Department. So on page 11 in that section, just notes on the revenue side how much of the ARPA funding is going to be used for staff, as I referenced earlier in the ARPA section. Environmental health related fees are recommended to go up by 3.5%, and you can see the schedule at the back of the section. And you can kind of see the overall increases and decreases among the various categories of fees that they do charge. A couple things that are recommended and not recommended, you can see on the expenditure side. Computer services fees are going down as we've kind of increased or decreased the number of laptops we need there as we've kind of come out of COVID. There's also been a request for an intern, which I have not recommended just because of the same reasons I keep saying throughout the evening here. Overall, the building leases budgeted increased a little bit, and that includes the costs of maintaining the presence in Beloit at the public library. Overall, grant funding that offsets staff costs is going down. So you can see that last bullet under expenditures, overall a decrease in the cost allocation line because we're not able to charge the various grants the same amount as prior years. Personnel, the department has requested, and I am recommending the elimination of the assistant director position. You'd see the cost savings there. That is a position that is also currently filled. There was a request to increase a .5 environmental health specialist position to a full-time at a cost of just under $40,000. That would have been partially offset by some of those fees that I talked about earlier. Would help with some workload issues. Currently, the department does have to prioritize which low-level things they are not able to get to with regard to inspections. So they definitely could use it based on their workload, but again, it was one of those issues that I felt like just could not recommend in the 2025 budget environment. And then one thing I would note here, this is a little different than some other places. They do have a data scientist position that is vacant and was held vacant in 2024. Unlike some other positions, I'm not recommending that vacant position be eliminated. There is no funding included. There was no funding included this year, but this one does have the opportunity that if we did get a grant, they could fund it. So if it was a grant-funded position, that'd be beneficial. So I've not recommended eliminating that position, although there is no cost to the county to leave that where it is. So overall, for public health, there's a decrease in the tax levy of just under 1%. Questions for the health department's budget?
Supervisor Sutherland.
Thank you, Chair Levy. So the full-time assistant director position is filled and it's being eliminated.
Correct.
And then the duties will be absorbed by the health officer and other department staff. If I were any one of them, that would put a little more stuff on my plate to do. Are they going to be compensated for that?
No, there'll be no additional compensation. I mean, this would be an example of things that, are the duties that would be distributed be already within their position descriptions. It wouldn't be additional like supervisory kind of duties they don't already have. As you said, it would just be more of the same, kind of stuff that they'll have to do. So no additional compensation.
Thank you.
Supervisor Fugasa.
Really quick, I know it's late. At page 7, my eyes are getting a little wonky, but maybe it's just a typo. Environmental health specialist, 123, 8.5 FTE, add 1. Should it be 9, or am I looking at that wrong?
I think so the way it looks there is the request was to add the half position, but then the recommendation is still the 8.5 because I didn't recommend the requested increase of 0.5. So that's what that means there in that column.
Excellent.
So requested but not recommended, so it remains 8.5.
Thank you.
If nothing else, then let's flip backwards. Again, in the ag and land conservation section, we didn't cover extension. So we'll talk about UW Extension, begins on page 8 of that section. So this is, the structure here is not new. It's been in place now for several years, where essentially the expenditures, largest expenditures for the contracted services we have with the state to fund the educators. And as you can see here on the list, it lists the different educators at the different FTE, who we're splitting those costs with and what the county's share is. So I won't go through that in detail. You can see that travel and training at the combined budget is recommended decrease a little bit. And then there's the separate account they have for educational programming that has its own fund balance that it collects over the years and spends for educational programming that has just under $20,000 left in it. So overall, the tax levy increase for UW Extension is 1.6% or just over $5,000. Any questions on the UW Extension budget? If not, the last section we have is for the county board. So we have a separate county board account that funds a variety of things, as noted in the comments here that begin on page 3. You can see how much is budgeted for per diems. We have legal notices. We have publications, subscriptions, and dues, which is partially to fund the county's association dues and the utility tax association dues, as well as the National Association of Counties. There is also a decrease in the training budget here. This represents the funding that we use to fund the costs for the County Association Conference. This is just based on trends. We haven't been having as many county board members go in the past several years, and so this just reflects more of reality, what reality has been. So otherwise, not many changes, but overall, tax levy for the county board account, $169,000. That's a decrease of about 3.8% from the prior year. Any questions on the county board account? If not, that's the last section. A couple comments. Beginning tomorrow again, committees can begin to meet, and those appeals can start. Every committee should have a budget discussion on their agenda for the next probably six weeks. But I'm going to pause there. I know it is late, but I did say that if there were other questions people had about the budget overall that we didn't talk about tonight, I would certainly entertain those.
Supervisor Schwartz.
Thanks, Chair. This is about the overall, it's the 1.5 million in additional debt servicing. Can you sort of explain that again? Just to make sure we're clear where it's coming, why it's happening, and why, what is the purpose behind it?
Yeah, so when the county board staff and finance committees met in May, they had kind of recommended two things related to the levy. One is that it was okay with the committees to increase the budget based on levy limits. And at the time, the estimate based on the current year was that levy limits might go up by 2%, maybe $1.7 million levy increase for operations. As I described before, what happened is we got that state aid payment for personal property aid, which reduced that amount from the average that I was expecting, maybe 1.7 million, down to $95,000. So the second thing that staff committee recommended was that we use another $2.5 million of one-time sources to keep taxes low. That $2.5 million was represented the increase we were going to see in debt service that we owed in 2025. So based on previous borrowing, we were going to see an increase of $2.5 million in debt service that we owed, that we could levy for, that could be debt service levy, but that, as you all know, the board has wanted to keep the taxes low by putting one-time costs, whether it's general fund or sales tax, to reduce the debt service levy. So the reason that I included in the recommended budget $1.5 million in an increase in the debt service levy, which is not what the staff and finance committee is directed to do, they directed to use $2.5 million to reduce that, was that over time, we used $5.6 million in 2023 in one-time funds to reduce the debt service levy to keep taxes. That was the tax cut. In 2024, $4.8 million was used in one-time funds to, again, keep those taxes low, lower than they otherwise would have been. It wasn't low, it was still a 7% levy increase. And so, in 2025, the recommendation from staff and finance would have had us use over $7 million in one-time funds to keep those taxes low, which is absolutely fine. That is a policy decision. But because over the long term, my sort of suggestion is to try to, lower the use of those one-time funds, because as we've seen here tonight, the using sales tax to keep taxes low, while certainly a fine policy decision that's up to you all, does limit what else we can use sales tax for. So for example, on several occasions where I've said we can't use sales tax for X, Y, or Z, it's because we're using it for reducing the debt service levy. So by increasing the debt service levy in my recommendation by that $1.5 million, where that put us was back around the same level that I was expecting taxes overall to be in May, even though for a different purpose. Totally acknowledge that, not for operations, but for debt service. So the word that I would use to describe is that, even though it was not for operations, there was a tolerance that I was interpreting from the staff and finance committees in May on the tolerance for tax increase, which was about $1.7 million or whatever levy limits would have been. And so by using $1.5 million, stayed within the general tolerance level for a tax increase, freed up sales tax money for other things, $1.5 million in sales tax for other things, and then began to chip away, took down from over $7 million that you need in 2026 to maintain that same level of taxes and move it down to $5.7 million. So again, kind of in the future, thinking a little bit longer term. So that was the rationale and why. I don't know if that answers all your questions, Supervisor Schwartz, because I'm sure there's other details in there we could talk about, but that was, again, kind of the big picture of why that is what it is.
No, it helps explain it. Okay. Not sure if it does for everybody else.
I'm confident that you're going to talk about that again.
Supervisor Towns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that's a good explanation, and that was a question I wanted to ask, so I appreciate Supervisor Schwartz talked about that. Could you just explain more clearly about how the state has stepped in to backfill the personal property tax, so it doesn't have to go on our levy?
Yeah. So this is, I'll explain as good as I, understand the formula they used, but essentially the state eliminated the personal property tax effective January 1 of 2024. And part of that, from the county standpoint or from local government standpoint, is that when you remove the personal property tax, then that removes part of the base of taxation that the county can increase taxes on, under levy limits, for example. And so part of the deal was that the state would provide a payment to counties, to local governments, to make up for that loss in the base. And that, how they were going to do that is part of the complex levy limit formula, which is why we have a smart finance director to help explain that to me. But in long story short is that the way that went in the formula was that gets added into the formula, and in the first year that we get that payment, which was in 2025 is going to be $1.3 million, is that then directly, no, not directly necessarily, but reduces the amount that we can levy. Which is why that $95,000 figure that I mentioned earlier is the maximum of levy limits. In future years, that personal property aid payment continues to be in the formula, and that is sort of then assimilated into the base going forward in a way that the state intends to not have a negative impact on our ability to tax from the elimination of the personal property tax. But then it becomes a lot more complicated that I can't really explain to you kind of what the impacts going forward are on that. So, I think Supervisor Towns, as you mentioned before, part of the intent of the legislature was to have that be tax reduction. That's why they eliminated the personal property tax. From a standpoint of tax shifting, that the personal property tax elimination was intended to directly impact those who pay the personal property tax, which isn't everybody. But then in the way that the formula has to work under the way that the magic deal was done, like it does end up spreading it out. And then based on what I've recommended, with increasing the debt service levy, we won't see that savings as much here because of that change, right? It would have, and so somebody could argue that, the recommended budget thwarts the intent of the legislature to provide, tax reduction in year one of that new law. I don't know if that helps. Probably not as much as
It
you or
does.
I would like, but
But essentially, what you're recommending then is that the savings or the reduction that we would feel in the operational levy, you're putting over onto the debt service. So if that had never passed the legislature, you're kind of justifying it by saying this is what it would have been otherwise. Is that kind of?
yeah, right. So I mean, I think to the point about what otherwise would have been, if they hadn't eliminated the personal property tax, or if it didn't have the effect it did in reducing the operating levy, what you would have seen in the recommended budget would have been taxing to the extent that we could have under levy limits, which would have been just over $1 million. And there would not have been the $1.5 million increase that you do see now in the debt service levy. and that there would have been $1.5 million less of sales tax funded capital projects in the budget. So you could still do that, right? I mean, you could still find $1.5 million of sales tax projects to eliminate and reduce the debt service levy in the way that would have otherwise been if that hadn't been the case. But that's exactly right. It would have been different.
Thank you.
Supervisor Gorman.
I'm so sorry, everyone. I'll keep this short and we'll get out of here. Is there any way we have within all of these levy limit strictures, could we go from a 2.4% levy, which was a choice of the Staff Finance Committee and was not a decision by this whole board, was just a decision by the Staff Finance Committee? Is there a way for us to go for a 3.4% levy increase or a 4.4 levy increase and use that for wages or retaining positions? Or is there a way to switch that operational in any way? And if you want to answer that on staff committee on Monday, that's fine.
Yeah, I can answer it quickly here. I mean, I think the implication of if you were to say, you know, it's a 2.4, let's make it 3.4 or whatever it would be, right? Because of whatever reasons you have for not, you know, wanting to continue to use those one-time costs. The implication of the 25 budget would be that the direct effect is would free up sales tax that could be used for other stuff. And the question is, what other stuff? So right now, there's a direction from the Finance Committee, and this is what we've done for many, many years, that sales tax should be used for capital projects or one-time costs outside of the $7 million that's been sunk into operation since 2011. So what could you do with the sales tax? You could most directly use it for other projects that aren't funded or other one-time things. You could choose to use it for other operational costs. The more you go down that road, the more that you may run afoul of state law, which indicates that sales tax really should be used to reduce, you know, taxes or what otherwise would be borrowing or things like that, right? Which is why we use it for capital and those one-time things. So that would be kind of what you'd be looking at.
Supervisor Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quickly, I was looking over like the training expenses for various departments. Can you explain how you came to decreasing some of those and leaving others the same?
So it was largely based on the requests from the departments. So there may have been a couple circumstances in which I might have decreased training. I can't think off the top of my head where it would have been, but for largely everything you see on a training decrease, most everything was the department requested in response to my request for them about where can you make some reductions in your operating budget, and they decided to do that.
Thank you. Anything else? Thank you, everyone, for your patience, your questions. Thank you, Josh, for doing a great job this evening. At this time, I entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Tillman, second by Sutherland. Any questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, we are adjourned.